The meeting open, and I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Migration for the inquiry into the value of skilled migration to Australia in Canberra. I welcome all the witnesses, good morning and welcome, who are appearing before the committee today, as well as members of the public. There may be some joining us a bit later. And the media in the media room and people listening to us online. Unfortunately, they can't watch online today, correct, Adrian? Correct. This is the first public hearing for the inquiry, and the committee anticipates holding additional hearings in the coming months. We'll be travelling around the country. We're going to try to get to every capital city and every regional area within a state. In accordance with the committee's resolution of the 31st of July 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. Those present are advised that filming and recording by the media is permitted during the hearing. However, we ask that members of the media present or listening report the committee's proceedings fairly and accurately. There are several Commonwealth agencies appearing before the committee today. And I remind those officers of those agencies and those appearing before us that the House and Senate have resolved that an officer of a Department of Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. These resolutions do not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies are adopted. I now welcome our first witnesses for our very first public hearing from the Department of Home Affairs to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Michael Willard, Deputy Secretary, Immigration Programs Group.
Welcome, good morning.
Andrew Kiley, First Assistant Secretary, Migration, Citizenship and Humanitarian Policy Division.
Welcome and good morning.
Thank you.
Cara Mayer, Assistant Secretary, Skilled and Temporary Visas Policy.
Welcome and good morning. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submissions to the inquiry. I really appreciate it. I'll now invite you to make a short opening statement, and then we'll just proceed to a small Q&A and discussion, if that's okay with you guys.
Thank you for the invitation. We don't have an opening statement. We're very much in your hands as to how we can assist, and obviously you've seen our submission.
Sorry,
I said we don't have an opening statement. We're
okay.
in your hands in terms of how we can assist,
okay.
And obviously we've made a submission to the inquiry.
I might kick off then, if that's okay with everyone else. Just very quickly, we've got Senator Lee Blythe here from South Australia, Louise Miller-Frost, who is from South Australia's seat of Boothby, myself, seat of Adelaide, online.
South Australia's really
South Australia, three of us, yeah. But we do have others online. We've got Ms. Cassandra Fernando. Good morning, Cassandra.
Good morning, Steve.
And then we've also got Leon as well, online, Rebelo. Good morning, Leon.
Good morning, thank you.
And that's it, I think. So there's 1, 2, 3, 5 of us. Thank you. I take it you've seen the terms of reference. We're looking into skilled migration and the entire way that it's done to see where the shortfalls are, where the positives are, where it's working, and where it's not working, obviously. There's been discussions about student visas, morphing them and converting them into certain skilled visas. We're also looking at the regional areas as well, where there's a shortage, perhaps specific shortages that may not actually come into the skilled realm, but certain techniques and certain skills that are required. And they could be simple things like cafes, restaurants, hospitality workers, hairdressers, and then we go up to the higher end, the health sector, where we know that we require more workers, more people to participate, where we have huge shortages both in the capital cities and in the regional areas. So if you wanted to just give us a bit of a a view of the whole system and how it's currently working. And we'll kick off with that, and then we can open up to some questions and answers.
Sure, Chair. I might start by distinguishing between the permanent skilled migration and the various temporary visas. So starting with permanent skilled migration, first of all, very broadly, you can think of it as two halves. One is what we term human capital, and essentially that's the part of skilled migration that runs through the points test. So you would have heard of the points test, and this is where points are attributed according to certain attributes that applicants have, and the points are weighted according to the sort of attributes that will make them a successful skilled migrant in Australia. So the biggest points weighting go to attributes like English language levels, to age, and to qualifications. There's a range of other points categories in the points test, but that's the three largest groups, as well as work experience. Within that human capital category, there's an element that's invited by the Commonwealth, and there's an element that's invited by states and territories. And within that state and territory element, there's a state and territory nominated visa, and then there's a regional visa. You mentioned you'll be visiting a lot of the regions. When you look at the weightings across the program, there's 66,000 places available for either state and territory nominated or regional visas.
That's not the Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth.
That's not the Commonwealth ones. And then there's far fewer places available for the Commonwealth allocations. So for those, you're looking at around 15,000 places. That's the human capital side of skilled migration. The other side is employer-sponsored side, where applicants require an employer sponsor, and that's really driven by the skills, the list that governs skilled migration, which I'm sure you'll hear a lot about. And there's around 44,000 places on that, in that category. I'm sure Mr. Kiley will correct me if some of those numbers are slightly wrong. So that's the permanent category. The permanent category is subject to a planning level, and at the moment, the planning level, when you look at the overall permanent migration program, sits at roughly 70% in the skilled categories and about 30% in the family categories. When you look at the skilled category, that 70%, of course, is made up of the skilled individuals, but also their immediate families who are choosing to migrate with them. So that's their partners and their dependent children. What we know from all sorts of analysis of skilled migration is that skilled migrants are big contributors across a range of key economic indicators. If you look at participation, skilled migration has participation rates, skilled migrants have participation rates that are much, much higher than the Australian average. So skilled migration helps lift up workforce participation.
In percentages, you wouldn't be able to...
We do have some figures on that. Let me just pull those up for you. There's a range of different ways of looking at it. So we published something called the Continuous Survey of Australia's Migrants. And what that looks at is employment outcomes and employment rates, participation rates at 6 and 18 months, so 6 months after migration and then again 18 months after migration. And if you look at across all skill stream categories, the figure's 93.7% participation.
93.7%.
Now, obviously we're selecting people as skilled workers, so you'd expect very high participation rates. General population 67.1% over the same period, and we can provide 67.1%. We could provide a report that we publish on the website that has all these figures in it. That's at 6 months, and then after 18 months, it becomes 95% for all skill stream categories. What we also see is average earnings slightly higher than the Australian average for skilled migrants. And when you look at fiscal impact, and the Treasury has a model that's known as the fiscal impact of newly arrived migrants. It's a Fiona model, and it's also published in this report. You'll see that over their lifetime, skilled migrants make significant fiscal contributions to Australia. So they put in far more in tax than they take out in terms of transfer payments.
So the myth of driving down wages in this area, in the skilled migration, is a bit of a furphy or a myth.
Yeah, there's a number
if you look at the stats, and there's
number of safeguards around making sure that we're talking about skilled migrants.
Yes.
So the first one is they have to be in a skilled occupation, and there's a list. I know you have JSA coming in after us, so I'm sure they can talk more about how the list is developed. But that is one of the safeguards. Within the temporary stream, there's salary thresholds that people have to be paid above, which is making sure again that they're at a skilled level. Just on that fiscal impact of New Australians model, Fiona, if you look at, and this is some work Treasury's done some time ago, but when they were looking at estimated lifetime fiscal impact of migrant populations, it was around $200,000 for skilled migrants. And when compared to the Australian population, that figure was minus 85,000. Now that's a Treasury figure. They're just looking at fiscal impacts, but that's just another indicator, I guess, that we'd draw to attention in terms of the skilled migration program. Outside of economic indicators, there's all sorts of social and cultural impacts, I think, that shouldn't be lost. We do tend to focus on economic indicators because it's a skilled migration program. But the sort of thing is, for example, we've had really strong growth in our skilled migrants who are working in health fields. And if you think about the impact of that in regional areas, access to GPs, hospitals, all of those sort of elements, skilled migrants are a big part of that. Similarly, we've focused on education and teachers. Again, we've seen strong growth in those categories because we've been focusing on them. And again, they have a big impact beyond simply the economic bottom line in terms of their contribution to society. That's the permanent migration program. Chair, you mentioned you're looking at the impacts of not just the temporary skilled migration program, but also other temporary programs in terms of impacts on Australia. I might start with the temporary program, which is the skills in demand visa. And what we've seen, particularly over the last couple of years, is very strong growth in both visa applications and visa grants around the skilled temporary visa. We've got a population, and I beg your pardon. We've got applications so far this year. This is up to the 20th of February, of about 85,000 visa applications.
That's separate from the 66,000.
Yeah, this figure is the number of temporary skilled. So the 66,000 is regional, and that sits in the permanent visa program. The temporary skilled program isn't subject to a cap. It's simply subject to the number of employers that are happy to sponsor workers, and obviously the number of workers that can be found. So we've seen very strong growth in that program over the last few years. At the end of 2024, there are a range of reforms brought in to introduce the Skills in Demand visa, and it operates across 3 streams of work. There's an essential skills stream, which at the moment is largely labour agreements, and then there's what we call the core skills stream, which is around the bulk of skilled occupations, and then there's another stream for highly paid people. So that's broadly the temporary skills stream. We also are seeing very strong growth in the working holiday maker visa, which I'm sure you'll hear about as you're travelling in the regions. We have what we're seeing in effect is still an impact of the COVID period. The working holiday maker visa, I think, as you know, is limited by age, so it's designed for young people. So either 30 years and below or 35 years and below, depending on the particular country. And what we've seen is, if you like, a few years of pent-up demand being released at the same time because of people not being able to have that opportunity during COVID. So we've seen some strong growth there. We have, at the moment, we have around 230,000 working holiday maker visa holders in Australia. Pretty much all of our partner countries are growing, but the strongest growth is coming from the UK in particular.
Sorry, how many is that?
It's 234,000 working holiday maker visa holders in Australia, and that's at the couple of weeks ago, 20th of February.
Excellent.
But Chair, I'm very happy to take questions or for you to
Open up for some
lead me in a
questions.
particular direction.
I'll have one question and then I'll hand over to Senator Bligh. But my question is the regional skilled visas and the, in fact, all the visas where they're mainly on this point system when they're going to a regional area. We're hearing that people don't stay in the regional areas, so they'll get the visa for that particular regional area and then they move into the city. Yes. Can you sort of give us a bit of a very quick sort of, and how would we fix that to have people to actually stay in the areas where they've applied to work? It's a
tricky one because you've got this. So the way the regional visas work is, in effect, it's a provisional visa for 3 years. So that what that means is for 3 years, people are expected to live and work in regions, and after that period, it converts to a permanent visa. So there's that 3-year period, and the thinking behind that period is that's a decent amount of time to allow people to settle and put roots down and give them the best possible chance of settling and remaining in a regional area. The tricky balance you've always got there is how long should that period be to allow that settling to work, but not to be a disincentive completely from people to get a regional visa. So if you put it at 10 or 15 years, well, I think you'd find that people aren't willing to commit for that period.
You'd hope in 3 years they make their community connections, they settle, they may have kids, and they end up staying there. But it'd be interesting, and you don't have to give us those figures now, but if you could, the total amount of people that actually remain after the 3 years and the amount that actually leave to cities, and the amount that go to other regional areas, because that's a benefit still. If they're going to a different regional area where the skill's needed, that is a positive thing, I think. So if you may have those figures on top of your head. If not,
we're happy to take that one on notice and see what we can get with it. We have it's a pretty good conversion rate from the provisional to the permanent, so people are certainly committing to that 3-year period, but I think the key question is after that 3-year period, what happens? I guess as well, I'd also say what should we be expecting? Should we be expecting
another batch of people coming in as well?
Or should they? What's the point of comparison? So should we compare it to what rate, for example, Australian-born citizens are leaving regional areas, or should we expect that the migrants have a much higher rate in terms of sticking in regional areas? There's a few questions there that I think are probably worth exploring.
It's like simple and straightforward.
Yeah, and sometimes it relates to the nature of the work. If someone's come in a particular role, say in mining, and a particular project comes to an end, then that they may be seeking to move to a different area, probably a region if it's mining, but there's also those sort of elements to it. Big questions that come up on regional migration. Part of it's definitely visa design. Big part of it as well is how does the settlement experience work for migrants in different regions. I'm sure as you travel the country you'll hear lots of stories about successes and otherwise.
Thank you. Senator Bligh, do you have...
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for appearing today. I just wanted to go into the modelling that the department does. You've talked about temporary visas, permanent visas, and things like working visas. So what modelling is done by the department to measure the impact on migration on things like housing and other infrastructure?
Well, that's Mr. Kiley to talk about how we approach the migration program each year, and we do a lot of engagement with Treasury and other agencies.
Yeah, so thank you. So each year we go through a process of engaging with stakeholders to work through the design of the permanent program. So that's set at $185,000 for this program year, and then includes looking at factors like workforce needs. Jobs and Skills Australia, who you're talking to next, can certainly provide some further information. Engagement with Treasury. We've got regular forums with states and territories at both the officials and ministerial level, again, to understand their needs. So that goes to the 66,000 visas that Mr. Willard was mentioning earlier, and how they're being used to support the state and territory workforce needs, but also underpinned by their own infrastructure, housing and planning requirements. So there's a process that we go through each year to do that. The other thing that we've done recently within the department is established a new modelling centre, the Immigration Analysis Centre. So it's in its early days, but we're hoping that centre, alongside the work that Treasury and others do within the Commonwealth and academia more broadly, can help us better use some of the data that Mr. Willard has touched on earlier, understanding fiscal benefits, contribution to construction, teaching and the like, to ensure that we are being as specific as we can when it comes to the design of the permanent program, but also how that complements each of the temporary streams that Mr. Willard noted, given they all need to work together.
And I guess given the numbers that we've had, particularly in the 22-23 and 23-24 and then 24-25, do you think that the scale of the recent migration into Australia has intensified pressure on things like housing and health services across the country?
I think the thing to think about with migration, it's always a supply and demand equation. So in health services, migrants have made a very significant contribution to the workforce.
I'm not questioning the contribution that they make, but just in terms of the numbers, and there are, we're talking 429,000, 538,000, 306,000. Like, they are large numbers, and we've got huge problems in terms of the infrastructure that we actually have. I think, and it's a question for the department whether you see that those numbers haven't matched the infrastructure capability that we have, and has put pressure on things like housing availability, access to health services and the like, regardless of whether you've got migrants coming into work in health services.
I think you're touching on net overseas migration figures there.
Yes.
And the latest figure, as you mentioned, is 306,000, which is a decrease of about 45% from the
so is that
figure
because
in
you saw that it
22-23.
was, is that part of the modelling? And I guess this goes into, is it by design, or is this just...
Yeah, I think...
Well, there's a couple of factors there, and what we saw coming out of COVID was a pent-up demand for migration. This has been discussed in Senate estimates a number of times, where they're similar to the Working Holiday Maker program that Mr. Willard noted earlier, a real pent-up demand for migration coming into Australia.
We can accept, I can accept all of that and understand all of that, but obviously during COVID we weren't necessarily building houses either, and we weren't building capacity in our health system. So you can have all the pent-up demand, but what does that do to the infrastructure that we have? And I guess I'm asking whether the department has has recognised that there has been additional stress placed on those services.
Sort of repeating sort of what I touched on earlier, that sort of builds into the engagement that we have with states and territories each year as well, to understand, similar to that supply and demand point that Mr. Willard mentioned, ensuring that the level of migration that we're having coming into the country is matched as much as we can with the delivery of services in the areas where people are settling.
Do you think you've been successful in that? There you go, I'll put it really simply.
I think there's a range of different measures that you can use, as Mr. Willard touched on earlier, to understand where migration is contributing, both from a social perspective, from a purely economic perspective.
Again, separate again. Yeah. Do you think that the numbers have matched what the states have been able to reasonably accommodate? When you've spoken to them as stakeholders, have any of them come back to you and said, no, or are they all saying no, we want more? I mean, that's when you're having those.
The feedback we tend to get from states and territories is more for growth in numbers. They have very specific.
So they want high, so you're getting states asking you for more.
Yes, they look at very specific needs for workforce.
Yep.
And when you've got very big projects coming in the pipeline that are about growth and about infrastructure, states are definitely interested in the question of how migration can be used to assist them with the delivery of those sort of projects. There's a few big ones. AUKUS is an obvious one where there's huge skilled workforce demands that can be very, very difficult to meet. When you look at unemployment rates in Australia since COVID, we've had a period of very low unemployment. What we tend to see when you have very low unemployment rates is pretty strong demand for migrants. I touched on the demand we were seeing in the temporary skilled program over the last few years. That's an example of where employers are saying to us they need more migrants in terms of temporary skilled migrants to fill very specific skills needs that help the economy.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time and I want to get everyone in to get a question, and then we'll come back if we've still got some time. Miss Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm interested in the recognition of skills, and we've all heard the stories of people who've been brought in on skilled migrant visas and then their skills or their qualifications aren't recognised and they end up driving an Uber. How are you addressing that sort of issue?
Within the migration system there is a skills assessment process where people's qualifications, experience are matched to the particular occupation that they're seeking to migrate for. So within skilled migration there's a lot of focus on that very question. There's a secondary part to that about, while they might have the skills, are they able to get employment in that skilled field in Australia? There is some work that the Commonwealth's taking on out of the productivity roundtable, and it's being led by the Treasury, but it goes to working on that very issue in terms of skills recognition. I think Mr. Kiley might be able to add a little bit about that process, but it's probably one that the Treasury best answers because they're leading it.
Yes, I think definitely Treasury best placed to speak to it, and working with the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations as well. But it goes to that point that you raised. We see sometimes some challenges between the assessment that Mr. Willard noted for the visa purpose, and then once they arrive on shore, particularly the specific occupational thresholds that they need to get to be recognised by Nurses Association or whatever that might be, which there are challenges in Australia with mutual recognition across states and territories, let alone with individuals who are coming from other countries. So it's a challenging area, but certainly one that Treasury is looking to work with states and territories on to see if there's ways that they can sort of push through that and go into the overall productivity effect that we're trying to reach, make sure that we are making the most effect of both those who are already here in Australia and those who may continue to arrive. But Treasury is probably best placed to speak to that particular line of work.
So the recognition issue seems to be sitting at in the health sector, the colleges and that sort of thing.
And that's one of the particular challenges. It's so disaggregated into each particular industry. There's certainly a role for the Commonwealth to play to try and drive work in that space, but that has to be with states and territories and with each industry. Again, understanding the role that each of those industries are playing to ensure that workers are appropriately qualified and they can deliver what they need to as a worker. alongside Australian worker qualifications and recognition across states and territories as well.
When you look across the occupations, there's obviously a very broad range of occupations. Some of them are occupations which require registration. I mean, the health occupation is a good example. Others are occupations that where it's a broad set of qualifications, but there's no registration requirement in Australia. We then have a range of entities known as skills assessing authorities. In some cases, that's the registration authority, effectively, because that's the most straightforward way to determine if someone has the skills. In other cases, it's a professional association. For example, Engineers Australia does assessments in terms of engineers' qualifications. And we use those to give advice to the department about, is this individual who says they're an engineer, when you look at their work history and their qualifications, does that meet the grade in Australia? And that's the process we use in skilled migration to make sure people are at the appropriate skill level. As I was saying, the second part of that is the migrant journey part, and there's various bits of research around there about the challenges that migrants can have in terms of finding occupation in their fields. We do get lots of reports, and when we look into them, in some cases it is a skilled migrant. In other cases, it could be a dependent of a skilled migrant who's never been through that assessment process and are then really struggling because their skills actually aren't recognised in Australia. And there's a big question there about how far should the authorities or the registration bodies come to meet them, and how much it is about migrants lifting up their skills to meet the registration standard.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
My understanding, certainly in the health sector where I used to work, Australia takes from about 4% of the world for doctors, so only 4% of the world we will accept their graduates. Even the UK takes 17%, so we seem to have a bottleneck somewhere. One would say possibly the colleges, where they're actually stopping us getting good quality doctors to come over. So, yeah.
Okay, in the short time that we've got left, I'll go to Ms Fernando and then to Mr Rebelo. Just speak up loudly and clearly so we can hear you. Ms Fernando?
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, in your submission, in 2024-2025, there were over 8,000 construction skilled migrants that migrated to Australia. So Australia's construction sector is facing workforce shortage, and the forecast indicate that demand will continue to rise. How is the department addressing the ongoing shortages in construction and in the housing sector?
Thanks, Mr Fernando. You're correct, it was 8,700 in 2024-25, and then another about 6,800 who came on temporary visas, so that's about 15,500 altogether. And so far this year in 25-26, it's about 9,157 who have been granted visas so far. We have a very wide range of occupations available in terms of the construction sector. What we've seen, if you take it back over the last few years, we've seen pretty strong growth in construction sector visa grants in the skilled migration programs. So if you go back to 2019-2020, which was, when we're looking at these figures, we always have to sort of be wary of the COVID effect, but the figure there was under 5,000. So if you take that forward 5 years, it's about 3 times that number. So that figure shows pretty strong growth. What we see is pretty high approval rates in the construction sector, in the order of 95% or so, those figures you mentioned are actually pretty strong growth on previous years.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr Rebelo.
Thank you very much. Just making sure you guys can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, fantastic. I just wanted to go back to the point in relation to Senator Blythe's questions earlier, about the way you engage with states and the fact that they're asking for more skilled migrants. Now, I just want to make sure that the department's not just responding to those requests. What sort of modelling do you, as the department, undertake or rely upon in order to, I guess, come to an assessment as to what is reasonable in those requests?
So we look at a whole lot of input that states and territories provide about the nature of the requests and what they're looking for, the sort of locations in terms of within the state, but also the particular occupations and shortages that they're trying to address. What we tend to see is states and territories very focused on the health sector in particular. We also, in terms of the way in which the migration program is put together, states and territories is certainly one input, and they're an important input, but we engage pretty broadly, pretty much all through the year with a whole range of stakeholders across the country. We have outreach teams who do thousands and thousands of engagements, so we also factor that into advice to government around migration program composition. And that involves both industry sectors, it involves unions, it involves regional areas. So there's a whole range of views that go into it. It's not simply a state and territory led program.
I guess what I'm trying to get at though is, are there any particular thresholds, or is that assessment data driven? Is it based on anything tangible, or is it sort of through consultation?
It's heavily driven through consultation, which does draw on a whole lot of data points. I mean, we have a lot of arguments put forward in terms of need for migrants across a whole range of sectors and regions, and also state and territory governments. But
it doesn't appear to be some sort of a threshold that we look at in terms of industry-specific thresholds or infrastructure thresholds, and then working back to the skills required. There's nothing like that.
I think if you look at the way in which the program's constructed, there's first of all there's a selection of occupations and what's an appropriate occupation for skilled migration. And I know our colleagues who you'll be speaking to shortly do a whole lot of work in terms of assessing what's happening in particular industries and where are shortages emerging, and where does that make sense for those occupations to be open to skilled migration. So there's a huge amount of work, there's a huge amount of labour market data that gets drawn on to look at those inputs. And you've got the right people here today, throughout the day, to talk about those.
And do you take modelling from JSA?
Absolutely. So the underlying list of occupations that's eligible for skilled migration is based on advice from Jobs and Skills Australia. And that's the modelling I'm talking about, and they're much better placed to talk about it in more detail.
And they're our next witnesses.
They're coming on shortly. But they draw on a huge amount of analysis and labour market data to determine which occupations should be on those lists and eligible for skilled migration.
Thank you.
Surely
because of the time, Mr. Rebler, I'll allow you one more question, and then we'll have to go on to the next session. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So just following that train of thought, surely there'd be modelling on supply and demand shortage levels. How formal is the labour market data that you use?
So we use the advice from Jobs and Skills Australia in terms of those occupations. They're best placed to answer the question of how formal the data is, but they draw on a huge amount of data, labour market data, to draw those conclusions and provide that advice. But they're really best placed to talk about that in more detail.
Excellent, thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. And Mr. Rebler, you will have an opportunity to ask Jobs and Skills Australia very soon. Thank you for coming in today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, and I think there was those percentages that I asked for earlier, please send it to the Secretariat if you can, by the 17th of April. You'll also be sent a transcript of today's evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to request any corrections to those transcription errors if there are any. But once again, thank you for coming and briefing us and giving us a better oversight into the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
If I just may, given this is the sort of the peak migration department, or the department that's responsible for migration, can I just suggest that we consider having another session with Home Affairs as well?
No doubt there will be another session over the period of the inquiry, Mr. Reblow, and we'll discuss that at our private meeting of the next batch of witnesses. Thank you. I now welcome Job Skills Australia. Just going to have to keep it tight.
Yeah.
So the next session we might go to one question only, and then we'll come back. So otherwise we can't get through the day.
Sounded like you were warming up for us.
Yes, certainly. Okay. We all ready?
What we might ask him.
Excellent. I now welcome witnesses from Jobs and Skills Australia to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Barney Glover, I'm the Jobs and Skills Australia Commissioner.
Welcome.
Simon Booth, I'm the Executive Director of Jobs and Skills Australia.
Welcome. Good morning.
Cliff Bingham, Assistant Secretary, Labour Market and Migration.
Welcome and good morning. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. So thank you for your submission to the inquiry. I'll now invite you to make a very short opening statement. We do have your submission of no more than a few minutes before we proceed just to a very open discussion, Q&A and informal discussion. Over to you, Mr. Glover.
Thank you, Chair. I will pass on the opening statement largely, Chair, in the interest of time, and I know members of the committee have questions to ask. I have a version which I would like to table, if I can, of what my opening statement would have been, Chair, for the committee members to see. Yes, that is it.
That is,
so
I need someone to move that we accept the tabling. Move
Yes.
Louise Miller-Frost. Thank you. So this paper is now tabled.
So with that, Chair, we're happy to go to questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for appearing today before the committee and giving us a bit of an oversight of Skills Australia. As you heard earlier, there were some questions, and I might start off with questions directly from Mr. Reblow, who was touching on the subject earlier. Mr. Reblow?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just following on from the previous discussion, so I was interested in the modelling that JSA provides to the Department of Home Affairs to inform them on their intake of skilled migration.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that, and I'll hand to Mr. Bingham to provide more detail as our expert on the work we do in relation to migration. Just in terms of perhaps an overarching comment, Jobs and Skills Australia under the migration strategy has a number of functions, a number of roles to play. We, of course, are an agency that provides advice to government generally with respect to the Australian labour market and its relationship with the what we call the National Skills System. Now, the National Skills System, the source of skills to support the Australian labour market, comprises the vocational education and training system in Australia, higher education, but also skilled migration. So we're very interested in the interplay between our domestic skills system and skilled migration. So we provide advice in relation to aspects of the skills and demand visa system. Our particular focus is on temporary employer-sponsored skilled migration through the skills and demand visa system. And the comments that Mr. Bingham will make in a moment will give you more detail about the depth and breadth of analysis we do through a range of mechanisms, both quantitative data analysis on the labour market, survey instruments of employers around recruitment difficulty, vacancy index information, as well as very detailed qualitative engagement we have with our tripartite partners to understand the rhythms of the Australian labour market and the impact on migrants in the Australian labour market in determining our advice to government, particularly in relation to this core skilled occupation list. And the core skilled occupation list is for the core skilled stream of the visas, the skills and demand visa system. And I'll ask Mr Bingham to give you a little more detail of the depth and breadth of data we use to analyse the occupations in shortage and with the propensity to be in shortage that then leads to their inclusion or not on the core skilled occupation list. Mr Bingham.
Thank you, Professor Glover. Mr Abello, I might make the distinction at the outset between the work on temporary migration and permanent migration. I suspect some of your questions go more to the permanent migration dimension, which I'll come to in a moment. As Professor Glover touched on, the migration strategy set out a role for Jobs and Skills Australia, primarily focused on employer-sponsored temporary skilled migration. The migration strategy foreshadowed that in doing that work, we would start with our domestic analysis of occupational shortages, which we present each year in our occupation shortage list. That is underpinned by a range of economic modelling, having regard to levels of employer demand, observed capacity of employers to be able to fill roles, and that does vary quite significantly across different parts of the economy and through different domestic training and education pipelines. There's a range of statistical modelling that lives underneath that. It's complemented by employer surveys and an industry stakeholder survey. Last year we had over 1,000 responses to that industry stakeholder survey. We then consult with state and territory agencies, with relevant Commonwealth agencies and with Jobs and Skills Councils in thinking about our preliminary assessments of whether an occupation is in national shortage or not, and that results in a final list of occupations that we believe to be in shortage versus not. Now, of course, when we present that it appears as a slightly binary instrument, but in reality, of course, there are different degrees to which shortages may exist. We see occupations, particularly in the construction sector, a number of those have quite persistent shortages and ongoing challenges of being able to fill roles. Other occupations, for example, clerical and administrative workers, by and large, have very high propensity to fill roles, very unlikely to have shortages. That forms an important starting point for how we think about temporary skilled migration and our analysis in the core skilled occupation list, but it is only one component. So that gives you a sense of current shortages, but of course, temporary skilled migration is thinking about the next 4 years for a temporary visa. So we also, in our analysis for the CSOL work more specifically, we think about our employment projections. So we think about not just is there a shortage now, but what is the likely trajectory of required growth in that occupation. We look quite specifically at worker outcomes from migrants. The migration strategy specifically asks that of us. So we use a range of administrative data from the Department of Home Affairs, as well as their continuous survey of Australian migrants, to give us an indication of how well migrants fare in the labour market in those occupations. And we also think about the complementarity with the domestic training system through higher education and vocational education and training. So we think about particularly outcomes for recent graduates from relevant higher education and vocational education and training pathways. And that's really important to test the complementarity of the different supply pipelines.
And so just on that, can I just ask, do you think that there is, or to what extent, I guess, do you think that migration is currently being used as something of a substitute for training those Australian workers?
So our analysis, and bearing in mind the skills and demand visa has only been in place since December 2024, as Home Affairs and their submission pointed to, there are a range of data sets that live underneath that, including data on visa uptake. From what we've seen in terms of primary applicants in the 482 visa category, so there's essentially the core skills occupation list and the TSS visa that preceded it, to date, those primary applicants still make up less than 1% of the total Australian workforce. So the total Australian workforce is nearly 15 million. Home Affairs will have more recent data than I can cite off the top of my head, but it's less than 1% of the base. Now, of course, that will vary from one occupation to the next in terms of their propensity to use this pathway relative to their total overall employment base. It's pretty early days for us to be able to make assessments of that, but one of the things the migration strategy did point to is an ongoing role for us in sort of monitoring the skills in demand visa, and as that visa has been in place for more and more years, we will start to build a bigger evidence base of which occupations are using it, to what degree are they using it, what fraction of their total employment base are they using it for, what are we observing in terms of domestic training and education outcomes for people coming through the pathways that would make sense for those particular occupations, what are we seeing in terms of attrition rates or retention rates within each occupation, what are we seeing in terms of wage growth trajectories, and they're the sorts of things that we would build in from a quantitative perspective to thinking about that ongoing monitoring role, coupled with extensive consultation on that. The migration strategy did foreshadow that as part of that monitoring role, we'd be regularly engaging with tripartite partners to be able to share with them some of the quantitative data that we are seeing and being able to understand the lived experience on the ground within industries.
Can I just add to that, just very quickly? I think a very important part of the design of the role of Jobs and Skills Australia in relation to temporary skilled migration is that we are to provide advice on those occupations to be included in the core skilled occupation list. There are 455 of those. But we then have a role to play in looking in forensic detail at the impact of skilled migration on the domestic labour market. That then influences our advice to government on subsequent versions of the core skilled occupation list. This is a feedback loop to take into account any indication we have of an adverse impact on the labour market due to skilled migration. And as Mr Bingham said, that process has begun. We've begun to do, as we alluded to in our submission, the analysis of those impacts. And at the moment, it's very early days. We don't see adverse impacts from the core skilled occupation list, temporary employer-sponsored skilled migration component of the skills and demand visa system. The second point I wanted to make, which is very relevant to understanding occupational shortages and domestic demand, is to understand that we also analyse why we have occupational shortages. So our role is not just to provide an occupational shortage list, but it's also to say, why are these occupations in shortage? What is the problem within the Australian skills system, or more broadly in the labour market, that means we are not filling vacancies? And we do a sophisticated analysis, which also feeds in to the advice we give to government on skilled migration. It is a very comprehensive, forensic and deep assessment of labour market trends with regular oversight, and then a feedback loop to make change.
And then that feedback. Thank you very much, Mr Reblow. If there's time remaining, I have to get to the others as well. We'll come back to you if we've got some time remaining. We also have Mr Caldwell who's joined us. Welcome, Mr Caldwell. The next question goes to Ms Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you. Look, I'm actually just going to follow up on what you've just said there. In terms of looking at why we have skill shortages in Australia, and I recognise there's probably a whole range of reasons, but can you talk us through some of those actual issues? Just going back, one of my issues from the previous witnesses was colleges in the health sector being blockers, but I'll throw over to you.
And you might like to ask about skills recognition as well in that regard. Again, Mr Bingham and Dr Booth can add comments here, but broadly speaking, we have a number of, based on a typology developed by Sue Richardson that we use for understanding shortages, we have a number of training gap shortages. In other words, we have job opportunities, but simply not enough training going on in Australia. They could either be short-term training or long-term training, and there are levers that governments can pull in order to address training demand. Now, we could go into more detail about why we don't see enough students studying in either vet or higher ed towards those jobs. So there's an underlying set of concerns around aspiration of young people for those particular occupations. So we have training gap problems. We also have what we call a suitability gap problem. So we identify that there appears to be sufficient supply coming out of our education and training system for the jobs that are being advertised, but the employers aren't employing people in the numbers we think is appropriate. When we look at it, it's because there's a mismatch between the skills that are actually being acquired in education and training and the skills required by industry. So we've got a gap, a suitability gap. And there are a variety of mechanisms underway around Australia between industry, government, unions and education and training providers to better understand that suitability gap, improve the curriculum, improve the skills of students so they're better equipped to match the needs of industry. So that's a suitability gap. Then we have a retention gap problem. And Mr. Bingham addressed that. It happens in the care sector in particular, where we see people who churn through occupations. So there's not a lot of retention, a whole range of reasons for that. It could be workplace issues, quality of work issues. It could be about salaries. It could be about a range of professional development or career opportunities. So that means we get churn. We seem to have enough supply side, but people are moving rapidly through those occupations. So we produce an annual report that says, yes, these are the occupational shortages. These are the identifiable reasons. And we're now doing more work to go more deeply into those reasons to understand, well, perhaps there are other things at play here. And I think it's fair to say that we're concerned about the number of young people who are not in employment, education and training in Australia. And I've been in the media this week talking about that. That is a concern. It's very high in regional Australia. You know, you have 1 in 6, 1 in 7 young people not in employment, education and training, 1 in 10 in metropolitan areas. So we have a problem with ensuring the aspiration of young people to go on to tertiary education. And we also need to ensure that we get the right balance between those seeking vocational education and training pathways and higher ed pathways. So it's a complicated domestic context. We need to take that into account. It might mean that it doesn't look like an occupation's in shortage, but we have a suitability gap. In the short term, we may need skilled migration to help industry meet their needs.
Thank you.
Did I miss anything on that, Mr. President?
Just,
Sorry.
Just one point I was going to add on that, which was essentially to the data sources that we use to establish those things. So from a retention gap perspective, we will use administrative data and other data sources held by the Australian Bureau of Statistics to think about occupational mobility and particularly occupations that people move out of with high frequency. With respect to training gaps and suitability gaps, one of the key employer surveys that we use to understand employer shortages, where we will ask employers, were you able to successfully fill a role, but also ask them for details with respect to how many applicants they had in total, how many they thought were formally qualified, but then how many they thought were suitable for the job at the end. So often we will see a shortage align with very small numbers of people who are job ready. And that can come about one of two ways. One is there are just a real lack of people with the right formal qualifications, which would be the ones we would typically assess as a training gap, and other instances where there's a high number of people who are formally qualified, but many of them are not considered to be job ready by the employer. And so they're the ones where it's more about the suitability of the training and the transition into work readiness.
Thank you.
I was just, before I go on to Senator Blythe, one very quick question. The suitability really interests me in terms of the employer saying they're not job ready. What does that actually mean? Or, and we hear it all the time when we're talking to employers who come to see us in our electorate offices saying, I can't fill this particular position, or I do use local staff, but it just goes haywire, it falls apart after a few weeks, after a few months, we can't retain them. Is that suitability? That they can't retain them? But certainly in a market, employment market, you can retain people by incentives, by a whole range of things. It's no different than any other commodity. It is different, but any other commodity that you're buying or selling, you either increase the price, you decrease the price, you make conditions better. How much does that play into it? And I go back to the early 90s, when to bring an overseas worker in, you had to prove that you had applied, that you had advertised in all the local papers, all the national papers, and then actually go through each interview that you went through and to explain why those people weren't suitable, which seems to be a more driven area where you're actually ticking the boxes to ensure that that suitability just doesn't become an excuse.
Perhaps just if I touch on part of that.
Sorry, then I'll come
No,
to
that's
it.
all good.
Part of that, Chair, because I think it's a very broad topic.
Very different times in the 90s, of course.
Yep, but I particularly want to focus on what's currently being done to address the challenge of suitability gap, with the sort of issue that business is saying, well, yes, we're getting a certain number of applicants, but we don't believe they have the skills needed for the job that we have. Now, that needs better relationships between industry and universities, industry and vocational education and training to make sure that our training packages in the VET system and the curriculum of our higher education programs is better aligned to the needs of industry, number one. So our jobs and skills councils, for example, are charged with the responsibility of training package reform, to work in a tripartite context, to work with industry broadly, unions, business, and government and education and training providers, and to say, well, if this training package is not delivering the graduates you need with the skills they need, we need to reform the training package. Similarly with universities and their industry advisory boards, whether it be through Engineers Australia or through various other peak bodies, to say to universities, your graduates need to get a different skill set. Put two other overlays on that at the moment that are really important. The generative AI overlay here, which is driving a lot of recruitment to be much more skills focused than it is qualifications focused. There is an international trend that we're part of a discussion about with colleagues in the OECD and elsewhere, a trend to see recruitment ads being all about, I want these skills, and not so much about I want these qualifications and credentials. It's a skills first view of the world. And businesses are saying as well, in a Gen AI infused technology rich future, we want to see more cognitive skills. We want to see problem solving skills, critical thinking skills, research capacity, communication skills. They're appearing more often in job adverts, and less technical skills because of the role Gen AI plays. All of that overlay, that global overlay, as well as that technology overlay, is influencing the design of the curriculum so that we can address the suitability gap and ensure our graduates have the skills they need, including AI skills, which are vitally important for the future, and what used to be called the soft skills, but actually are vitally important skills that will ensure that graduates are able to be job ready when they have an opportunity to apply for jobs.
Soft skills, we're talking about communication,
manners, problem solving,
etc., dress codes, etc.
But everything that absolutely makes someone able to work in an environment where they can use technology for a technical support, but they have the ability to communicate and they've got the knowledge and education to back them up. Now, we've just released a joint report with our counterpart organisation in Singapore about Skills First. The OECD delivered a massive report last year on Skills First, huge amount of data about what's happening in the world with this shift to skills. Now, importantly, in the context of your committee, skilled migration, vitally important that we understand robustly the qualifications and the credentials of migrants wishing to come to Australia, but equally, importantly, in the future, we're going to be very interested in the skills embedded in those qualifications.
Thank you. I've got hundreds of questions, but knowing that we also have another three people that want to ask a question, I'll go over to Senator Blythe.
Thank you. Really simple one, this one. What are the three top skill shortages in Australia today?
Skill shortages. Mr Bingham, what would you say are the top three?
Top three.
If I thought, well, and there's a question of quantification here, but the ones that certainly in the past 5 years that we've been working on them that I feel are the most persistent would be, well, I'll go four. Health, education, care and trades.
Yeah.
Now, there's a range of occupations that, of course, live under each of those. Yeah, I did say I would go four.
That's very good. And then as a follow-up to that, I guess, has the government ever indicated to you that there may be different education priorities? So have they indicated different education priorities for your department?
Well, if you look, for example, Senator, at the core skilled occupation list, because this reflects, in a sense, our assessment of skill shortages.
I understand that. So that's
but the government hasn't instructed us on inclusions in that list, and that list includes all of the construction trades at the appropriate skill levels for the housing and construction industry. It includes a raft of care-related and health-related occupations, all the nursing-related occupations, for example, and all of the other areas that Mr Bingham referred to. So in other words, it is our assessment that influences that list.
Yeah, and you've never been directed by government to include different things?
No.
That's easy.
No.
I guess in terms of the underutilised skilled migrants, that there was a Deloitte 2024 report, the $1 billion benefit, which I'm sure you're very well aware of, saying that there were more than 200,000 permanent migrants that had underutilised management and commerce qualifications. And yet we've got universities. I spent 2.5 decades in universities before coming into politics, with international students coming through with management and commerce degrees. I guess, how can we better utilise those underutilised migrants that are already here?
There is a significant conversation going on. I think the work of SSI in relation to that Deloitte study has certainly stimulated a great deal of discussion about how we need as a nation to respond to the underutilisation of skills in amongst our migrants and refugees in Australia. I would add that it is not simply an economic imperative for Australia to address that, because we are missing the opportunity to ensure that those people, both visa holders and secondary visa holders, can fully participate in the Australian labour market and address skill shortages. But I think it's a very important contribution to social cohesion in this country. I think if people have a sense of belonging and they have a sense of recognition of their skills and the contribution they can make, they will have a better sense of connection to Australia. So I think there's a social cohesion imperative and there is an economic imperative to do that. So I am encouraged by the conversation going on about what could be done. We need to address, and I'm an independent statutory officer, so I can say my own personal views on these issues. My personal views are very strong on these issues. I think government should do more. But I'm encouraged by the conversations going on to address that. And I'll be at the press club when Martin Parkinson addresses this in a couple of weeks' time.
Fantastic. And I'm conscious we're very, very short for time. So what is your agency doing to address that? So it's concerning, but is there anything specifically that your agency is doing?
No, we're not providing advice at the moment in relation to skills recognition. It's not part of our work plan to do that. We are, as an independent statutory officer though, I make public comment on any aspect of the Australian labour market that I think needs to be addressed. I make those comments publicly.
Okay, but there's nothing in your work plan that you're actually doing to address.
We are doing work on a thing called the National Skills Taxonomy.
Okay.
That taxonomy is designed to create a shared common language to describe skills in the skills first manner that Professor Glover described. We think that will be a very important contribution to provide the underlying infrastructure that enables effective, forward-looking, future-proof skills recognition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And in the short time that we've got left, which is a couple of minutes, I'll go over to Mr. Caldwell if he has any questions. Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My apologies for that.
That's
I just was on mute. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll be quick. Just in relation to the skilled migration program and sponsorships, is there any evidence that the skilled migration program has been tilted towards getting more people into occupations that are easier to sponsor rather than those that are most critical to the economy?
Perhaps I could make a broad comment on this one and then hand over to Mr. Bingham or Dr. Booth to comment. We've just begun our analysis of the skills and demand visa system in accordance with our responsibilities under the migration strategy. And we mentioned this in our submission to this committee. That's ongoing work, and we'll be providing more analysis to government in the near future. But certainly from our analysis, I don't see any evidence to support the statement you're making, but I would say it's very early in relation to an analysis of the skills and demand visa system, particularly both the specialist skills and the core skilled components of the strategy. But certainly on our analysis, we're monitoring it carefully. Our opinion at the moment would be that it's operating as it's intended, and we'll be continuing to monitor that very carefully. But I don't see any particular indication of what you're suggesting. I don't know what the definition of difficult versus easy might be. It might come down to visa processing, and that's not a matter for Jobs and Skills Australia, that's a matter for Home Affairs. So from that perspective, I couldn't comment. But certainly from my perspective, across the broad range of occupations, we're seeing behaviours under the skills and demand system that are not inconsistent with what we saw previously. Mr. Bingham?
That's correct. And to your point about what skills Australia needs, I note our occupational shortage list, our most recent one published in October 2025, found that around 29% of the occupations that we assessed were in shortage. That's around 300 occupations out of 1,022. So it is a very broad suite of skills that Australia needs, and temporary skilled migration in this country is an employer demand driven model. So we can't really test the counterfactual of an employer was contemplating sponsoring for occupation X, but instead chose to sponsor for occupation Y. We can merely observe where they are sponsoring, and as Professor Glover touched on, for example, through the core skills stream, we see predominantly employer sponsorship in professionals and technicians and trades, and that's highly aligned with where we see persistent shortages over the 5 years of work we've been doing in the occupational skill shortage list.
Thank you. Just one further brief question. When, if ever, has Jobs and Skills Australia undertaken a formal analysis of whether sustained high migration is discouraging domestic training investment? Have you ever investigated any causal links between those two things?
Well, as I indicated earlier, one of our responsibilities is to monitor impacts on the labour market, and that would include our work around the underlying reasons for occupational shortage, and that relates to the capacity of our training system to ensure that we're generating people with the skills for the needs of the economy. So in that regard, there is a direct relationship. So we are monitoring impacts on the labour market, and as I mentioned earlier, this is, I think, a really important feature of the role of Jobs and Skills Australia, both to watch carefully what's emerging in the Australian labour market, to provide advice to government on the core skilled occupation list or other aspects of the skills and demand visa system, and then to monitor carefully and in a very deep and sophisticated way any indications of adverse impact, and then to adjust the core skilled occupation list advice to the Commonwealth accordingly. We do not see that adverse impact in our very early analysis, as we indicated in our submission.
Thank you. We'll now go around for another quick round of questions. If we can keep it to one question so we can get around to everyone else so you can actually ask your second question, I'd really appreciate it. Mr. Rebelo.
Yes, thank you. Just honing in on the Cameron's question about your analysis. Now, I'm just wanting to know, is there any relation that you're aware of in terms of the link between migration in certain occupations and whether or not that's suppressing wage growth or wages more broadly?
Well, I'll let Mr. Bingham comment as a labour market economist in relation to this. What I would say is one of the important changes that was made under the migration strategy was to increase the temporary skilled migration income threshold. That increase was well overdue. There hadn't been changes in that particular threshold for many years, and it's an important baseline threshold for being eligible for an employer to be eligible to sponsor a visa holder to a particular occupation in Australia. The long-term lack of increase in that threshold, in my view, could lead to wage suppression. The fact that that's now been significantly uplifted and is indexed gives me greater confidence that there is less likelihood of wage suppression because of the core skilled occupation list and its relationship with the domestic labour market. The other point I'd make that I think is really relevant here, and I think is a feature of the work of Jobs and Skills Australia, is we do very comprehensive engagement with key stakeholders who are intimately involved day to day in the Australian labour market. That's business through a range of survey instruments and consultations with the union movement, with education and training providers, with state and territory governments, who I think would be acutely aware if there were examples of, even idiosyncratically or anecdotally, of wage suppression. But at the macro level, those sorts of movements in the migration strategy, I think, have gone a long way to addressing that. Mr. Bingham?
Agree with everything Professor Glover said. I think your question has two key components to it. One is the annual flow of migrants, and as I touched on before, typically for the skilled migration pathways, we would typically see less than 1% of the total employment base come into the country through that pathway in any given year. So in an individual year, it would be highly unlikely to have wage impacts that are tangible or easy to unpack in a counterfactual sense. I suspect your question, though, may be going more to, over many years, what is the cumulative effect
It's also in relation to those certain occupations. So for occupation specific, when we're not taking into account the entire workforce, is that enough are we using it in a way which is suppressing wages within the context of that occupation?
Yeah. I'm not aware of any analysis, particularly what you would describe would require a multi-year longitudinal analysis of wage trajectories. It would then require an estimate. I think it would only ever have to be an estimate of a counterfactual of what would have happened with that wage trajectory in the absence of migration. And one of the challenges which I think better administrative data is helping us to solve, but historically has been a great challenge, is detailed and robust, very specific occupational wage data. You know, there's been a range of data published by the Australian Bureau of Statistics for decades, which talks about wage data in more aggregated occupational groups. I think linked administrative longitudinal data with very detailed occupations attached to it will enhance our ability to think about very specific occupations, their observed wage trajectory. But of course, then the question is, what would it have been in the absence of migration? And indeed, what sort of signals might that send through the domestic training and education system to change overall supply and demand? So I'm not aware of anything that has gone to that level of detail. It's theoretically possible, but would be very complex.
Thank you. Ms Louise Miller-Frost.
Is there any work being done with the qualification gatekeepers? And I'm again going back in the health system, it's obviously the colleges, in terms of recognition of overseas skills for those areas that we have a shortage in?
I think this is part of a body of work that is ahead of us as a nation, to be honest. I think the work of SSI has opened up a considerable conversation around the role that gatekeepers are playing in stopping appropriate levels of skill recognition. And it's not simply ensuring high standards, which we should ensure in Australia. Our health system deserves high standards as appropriate, but there seems to be evidence of exploitation of people over and over again seeking to have their qualifications assessed. I think Dr. Booth's comment about the work we're doing on a skills taxonomy is going to help in many instances to better understand the skills of migrants and to match that to the skills needed in industry. And we think that will contribute in a very significant way to better skills and skill recognition for migrants. So I think this is an open question, but I'm very pleased that there is significant discussion going on around it.
Thank you.
Ms Blythe.
Thank you. I just wanted to delve into, you mentioned the 4 priorities of what we're trying to get into Australia that we need. The skills in demand visa appears to exclude tradies. Have you provided advice to the ministers about that or to the government?
But it doesn't exclude tradies.
It doesn't?
No, all the construction trades that you would expect. There are some low-skilled trade-related qualifications that are outside of the core skilled occupation list.
Yeah, so there's two dimensions to this. One is the specialist skills stream within the skills and demand visa, and to your point, technicians and trade workers, machinery operators and drivers, or labourers are excluded from that. Yep. That was a decision of government. JSA was not part of the...
Have you provided advice, though, to say that they should be included?
We've not been asked for advice on the specialist skills stream.
It's the specialist skills stream.
Correct.
The core skills stream includes...
So you haven't been asked for advice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, on the core skills stream, which JSA was asked for advice as Professor Glover touched on, there are some lower skill level roles. So skill level 4 and 5 occupations are out of scope for the core skills occupation list. Yep. That involves some lower skilled construction roles.
Could you give us an example of one of the occupations? Just off the top
some
of
of I'm trying to remember the names, but there are a range of runs. So truck drivers.
Okay. Thanks.
And there are, and I'll get the names wrong, but there are lower skilled labourers assistance type roles that are out of scope for the core skills occupation list, but within technicians and trade workers, so plumbers, carpenters, roof and wall tilers, electricians, etc. All construction trades workers are on the core skills occupation list. Correct, because they're all skill level 4 and 5 and ineligible for the core skills occupation list. That point made, as Department of Home Affairs touched on in their submission, there is a third stream of the skills in demand visa which reflects labour agreements. Those are matters worked through between whether it's a regional area in the context of a designated area migration agreement, an industry labour agreement or a specific employer agreement. where those lower skill occupations can be used.
Like a PALM scheme?
PALM is somewhat removed, but there can be instances. So if I'm an employer and I wish to hire 5 workers for a low-skilled occupation because I'm having real challenges in my region being able to fill those roles, and I can demonstrate that, I can make an application to the Department of Home Affairs to seek a labour agreement, and if that's approved, I can then bring in those workers.
Do you think it's fair to say that they're needed, those workers? So is that something that's come up in your...
The essential skills level.
Yes.
Thank you. In order to be fair, I'm going to ask Mr Caldwell if he has one very last question.
Thank you, Chair. I do, just briefly. Just going back to the key stakeholder discussions, I'm interested in the balance between a data-driven analysis and the stakeholder relations kind of driven analysis and outcomes. So one question is, how do you strike that balance? And the second question is, could you perhaps on notice, through you, Mr Chair, provide a list of those key stakeholders that are on your shopping list of who you would speak to in arriving at your conclusions that are made in your recommendations?
I think, Mr Caldwell, if you were to, and we can direct the committee to our website where we provide very detailed assessment of the consultation we have done, for example, on the core skilled occupation list, which would give you, I think, an indication of the raft of business-related peak bodies and industry partners that we would consult with, alongside of unions and individual migrant workers and others that we would engage with. We did a very extensive consultation process. The qualitative information of the lived experience of migrants in the Australian labour market in key occupation areas, alongside of the real experience of employers in seeking to fill vacancies and the challenges they face, is a critical component of our assessment of the extent to which occupations are at risk if not included in a skilled migration list. So we can provide a link to the detail of that. I think the balance is an appropriate balance between qualitative work that we do and, of course, all of the ABS-related labour market information we have, and increasingly administrative data that we use to inform what's literally happening in the flows through the Australian labour market. But I believe what's adding huge value to our assessment is migrant worker involvement. So what is actually happening to workers? Why are they challenged in some occupations, in some workplaces? Is that an indication that we should be very careful about bringing more migrants into that particular area because of migrant worker outcomes? I think that's a really important consideration that the migration strategy makes very clear we need to take into account. And if you were to look at our core skilled occupation list across the 455 occupations, some of them we indicate with a particular symbol as occupations that we are putting on watch, because we are watching carefully their data to see if they should remain on the list. So we make a very clear indication to employer groups and to others that some occupations are threshold, potentially could come off the list in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr Glover. Being no more questions, I do have one request from one of the members, from Ms Fernando. If you could possibly submit the JSA report that was launched last year, the One Jobs and Skill Report 2025 Connecting for Impact, to the committee, so that can form part of our assessments and everything else, if that's possible.
And we'll also provide on notice the link to the core skilled occupation list.
So thank you very much for appearing today. That brings us to the end of this particular session. If you've been asked to provide additional information, please send it to the Secretariat by Friday the 17th of April, if possible, 2026. And you'll be sent a transcript of your evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to correct any of that transcript if you feel that there's been a transcription error. On that note, thank you very much, and we may call upon you again.
Happy
Thank
to
you.
come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just music.
It's cold here.
Sorry.
I put this on this morning, thought I'd be too hot. Now I'm like, oh God, I wish I put
Just
a
remind you,
jacket on.
broadcast is still on.
Oh, right. That's all right. We can chat about being cold.
Sorry? They're on video, our next witnesses, okay. Excellent. Our next witnesses, Infrastructure Australia, are on video, and I now welcome the witnesses from Infrastructure Australia to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Adam Koch, Chief Executive of Infrastructure Australia.
Thank you. Welcome. Next. Ms Fox.
Yes,
I just need you all to state your name and the capacity that you're appearing before the committee.
Sophie Fox, Acting Chief Planning of Insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's just the two. Terrific. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you very much for your submission to the inquiry. I'll now invite you to make a very short opening statement of a few minutes before we proceed to a discussion and a small Q&A. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly explain the role of Infrastructure Australia and the report that formed the basis of our submission. So Infrastructure Australia is the Australian Government's independent infrastructure advisor. We provide independent advice right across the project lifecycle, from early stage planning to business case assessment to post-completion evaluation and policy work as well. In 2020, the Council of Australian Government's First Ministers asked us to monitor the conditions of the construction sector, particularly around the issues of market capacity. And so we've been preparing a report on that for the last 5 years. The way in which we do that is we have data sharing agreements with all the states and territories of their forward pipeline of infrastructure work. We then run that through our own model, and it gives the plant labour, equipment and material to deliver on that demand. In terms of labour, we analyse it and provide occupation code level data on what's in shortage around Australia. We have consistently found for the last 5 years or so that there are deep shortages across a range of occupations. About 60% of the occupations we measure are in shortage. And so over time, we have provided further advice on ways to increase the supply of labour, materials, and also improving productivity in the sector to do more with less. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thanks. Just very quickly, could the current partnership settings be expanded to extend to other federal and state government stakeholders in Australia's migration program? In other words, there's certain partnerships. Could it be extended, especially in regional areas?
So we do collect data on regional areas through the forward pipeline data that we have. So it is a mixture of state government data and private sector data as well. We found in our last report that a number of regions will be in very deep shortage for particular utilities projects that are being delivered in the region. So, for instance, in New South Wales, places like New England, Northwest, and in Queensland, the Sunshine Coast and Wide Bay, and in Tasmania in the southeast.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll now go to Mr. Rebelo.
Thank you, Chair. Infrastructure Australia's consistently warned about the infrastructure deficit that's associated with rapid population growth that we're seeing. I'm interested in your views on whether current migration policy is consistent with infrastructure capacity.
Are there any questions for this?
Our advice aligns to what the projections are. So we just released, for instance, the infrastructure priority list this week, and that is a pipeline of about 68 projects around the country, and we have had regard to the mega trend of population growth. So we've made recommendations on what needs to be delivered over the next 10 years. we don't really take a view on whether the migration setting aligns with infrastructure. We just respond to what we think the demand would be based on people at the Centre for Population.
And what are the migration assumptions that were used for the preparation of your recent priority list?
It's based on mostly the Centre for Population that's in Treasury, and they do analysis and have done for more than 5 years on where Australia is heading in terms of its population. So roughly 40 million over the next 20 or 30 years. So we have put in place in our priority list a range of infrastructure projects that we think will help support that growth.
So those assumptions sort of adopted independently, or they provided through the Treasury? How does that work?
How does the Centre for Population work? So you may need to ask them, but my understanding is that they are a part of the Department of Treasury that are specialised in particularly looking at the issues of population.
Yeah. Would that be, I guess, concerning though, because the net overseas migration's consistently been forecast incorrectly. So if we're relying on assumptions from the Treasury, would that be concerning?
Well, we've looked at a range of options for basing it on, and the Centre for Population Growth is a federal government agency that has a consistently good regard. So we relied on that. Projections are, including our own work, they are just projections based on existing data, and they have assumptions behind them. But that was regarded as the best quality data that we could get.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you for appearing today. 3 of us here are from South Australia, and we have an enormous pipeline of infrastructure projects coming up, which I'm sure you're fully aware of, between AUKUS, shipyards, hospitals, North-South corridor, all sorts of things. And all I hear about is labour shortage and how we're going to actually be able to do all of these things at the same time. So in terms of the types of skills that we need and the workforce, is there work that you are recommending, changes that are made, or anything that we can do to actually make this better?
So it's a consistent story pretty much right across the country, and the recommendations we have made are, yes, we think that there could be an opportunity to better align the migration settings with the shortages in construction. So in our submission, we noted that there are a number of industries where they have fewer shortages but a greater share of the visas that are granted. And so there's potential to better align that for certain skill sets. But the majority of our recommendations have been about the homegrown workforce, and there are a range of issues with the construction sector, broadly around attraction and retention. There's a weak pipeline of people who are attracted to work in the construction sector, and there is also what's called a leaky pipeline of the people who do decide to join the construction sector. They often leave in the middle of their apprenticeship or when they hit the industry. And part of that is around largely working hours and working conditions. There's a lack of flexibility in the way in which projects are delivered. It's highly physical. There's a lot of conflict and stress. It doesn't align with kind of future workforce preferences. So there has been work undertaken in a number of states and territories about how to deliver projects in a different way. There's a culture and construction task force that's looked at delivering projects on a more flexible schedule and attracting more diverse skill sets into the industry. Another aspect that we have recommended is the opportunity to use productivity to get more with what we've already got. So that's using things like modern methods of construction, where you construct in large parts of what you need to build in a manufacturing type environment. This is particularly good for housing. And then you ship it on site where it's essentially assembled together on site. And that means you need a lower skill set in the manufacturing environment, and that the actual electricians, plumbers, etc., are on site doing higher value work than perhaps they were doing before. But you know, it needs to be an attractive place for people to come to work in and then to stay in as well. So migration settings will go some way, and we think there's a better way to have a look at the portfolio of skills, but we will need to have quite a lot of focus on the homegrown workforce.
And can I just query something you said fairly early on about the share of visas that are in this area? Is that demand driven? Like, are the employers just not asking for people, or they're not identifying people to come as skilled migrants? Or what? How did the share breakup happen, do you think?
So we haven't done. Ms. Fox may have a comment. I don't believe we've done that else. Ms. Fox, do you have a comment on what's driving that?
We haven't looked directly at what's driving that, but we did observe the introduction, for example, recently in 2024 of the skills in demand visa settings, that there is been an increase in, say, visas granted to trades roles, as well as visas that are nominated for regional areas. That broadly does seem to align with the demand trends that we've been projecting. So it seems like there is a bit of a responsiveness to the market of these current migration settings.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you. Just following on from Ms. Frost, Louise Miller-Frost's question, with a real South Australian angle to it, because there's previously, but it is very important. In South Australia, we've got a whole range of pipeline of infrastructure taking place at the moment, and big infrastructure projects. At the same time, we have our AUKUS agreement and the submarine build and defence industry. What we've seen in the past, and one of the first waves, I suppose, of taking trades and attracting trades, which then left the housing market very vulnerable in terms of being able to find those trades, was mining, the mining sector. A lot of people went to work in the mining sector, good money, good pay, good conditions. That then left a shortage in our domestic market in our cities and regional towns. What we're envisaging, or what we're seeing, and what we're being told by the submarine build that's going to take place, 5,000 people just on the submarine build over the next 10 years, approximately 30,000 people to feed in to the different manufacturing and areas that need to be supporting the submarine industry and defence build as well in South Australia. So we're looking at anything between 30 to 35,000 people that are needed with skills just for that area. Has that been taken into account of how we're going to ensure that we continue to maintain our housing infrastructure, even the big pipelines of infrastructure, including our mining builds that are required as well? Which is it's a great issue to have for any government of any persuasion, I think. But there certainly will be some big challenges when it comes to infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we actually, on our priority list release this week, have listed the enabling infrastructure needed for Osborne and in South Australia and Henderson in West Australia, because it's not just about the submarines, it's also about freight transport to get the materials and people in. It's the housing to support those people. It's the energy. It's the manufacturing innovation hubs. There's a whole big piece of work of infrastructure to make that investment a success. So it's definitely something we have regard to. I know in the South Australian context that the new Coordinator General role that the South Australian government has appointed has a big focus on this and the defence precinct issues. And it will just require all levels of government, Australian, state and local, working together really effectively, like we have on areas like Western Sydney Airport in Sydney, where there were agreements made between all levels of government about here's that core asset of the airport, and then here's the other state roads around it and innovation hubs like Bradfield, etc. So it would likely need something like that. But I know that's a very active piece of work between Australian and state governments.
You mentioned the list that you've worked on. Would it be possible for you to get us that list?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. I might ask Mr Caldwell if he's got a question before I go to Senator Blight.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Adam or Sophie, just I guess, have you got a sense, in having arrived at this new priority list, have you been able to sort of assess what there may well be by way of an infrastructure gap or backlog that has been created by the rapid population growth we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years?
That's not analysis that we've done in quite that way, but I guess the priority list outlines the highest priority projects that as we see them. I mean, we've taken a policy view on if our cities grow to a certain size, then they'll require different types of transport, like metros, and in smaller cities, light rail, as opposed to everyone jumping in their car. And some of the water infrastructure as well. So the way in which we've done that report is look at the broader mega trends that are affecting Australia, like climate change, population growth, changing terms of trade, those sort of broader issues, and then looked at the different asset classes in infrastructure and how they need to respond, both in a policy sense and then also in a project sense as well. But we haven't analysed a specific gap or number, and I often find those numbers are a little how long's a piece of string, to be honest. I don't have a real number for you, but what we put forward is about 68 pretty major projects around the country over the next decade or so.
So do you think it would be useful, though, to sort of tie, like, if there's a skills pipeline maybe issue, and we know that the construction of infrastructure and housing is going to be somewhat constrained by that pipeline, maybe even capital pipeline as well, but let's just say the skills that are required. Do you think it would be useful to sort of set the infrastructure capacity and capability up front and then say, well, this is how much sort of migration and growth we can actually service with this infrastructure? Like, if you flipped it around the other way, would that actually be a useful thing to do?
Well, the market capacity, that might work if there was only sort of one decision maker. But we live in a federation, there's a range of states and territories, and they all have infrastructure pipelines of their own that they have ambitions for, and that is fair enough. What we have done with the market capacity report is take the demand and then matched that to our understanding of supply, and then just fed that information back into the system. So I think that report has had an impact on the way in which Australian governments have approached their infrastructure pipelines. So when we first started doing the work, there was just unlimited demand going into the system, which is why COAG asked us to look at it, to add it all up and what does that actually mean. And since that time, after COVID, there was a big fiscal response on infrastructure, and it meant that there were big cost overruns and big time blowouts as well. But over time, we've seen a much better, more stable set of decision-making introduced into the system. It's still more demand than we have supply, but just looking at the Commonwealth level, the Transport and Infrastructure Federal Financial Agreement that was renegotiated a couple of years ago has had a range of reforms to it to try and slow that pipeline down in a much more organised way. So the Australian government now will commit to a business case, not a full project in the first instance, so a smaller amount of money, do the proper planning, and then make a decision after that about delivery. And they're also encouraging or require the states and territories to develop a 10-year transport infrastructure plan, which is provided in confidence to the Commonwealth Government. And that makes sure that the states are properly planning their projects, and there's a sequence. It'll change year to year, but there's a real depth of thinking and a sequence to the projects going forward. So, unless we lived in a different political system, we probably couldn't do that matching, but we can certainly provide that information into the system and people can make decisions from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Blythe.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I guess noting back to what Mr. Rebello was going into in terms of the data that you've relied on from Treasury, migration numbers that the government were using were out by hundreds of thousands in their own estimations. So it's probably fair to say that relying on that data, while you say it's from a source, was out by quite a long way. What impact has that had, do you think? I mean, Australia is one of the most expensive places in the world to build infrastructure. In your own submission, you note that there are 6,900 skilled visa applicants that are coming through in the construction industry, and you're projecting that we will need an additional 202,000 workers to deliver these pipeline projects. Looking at that pressure in terms of the net migration numbers that we have in Australia versus the skilled workforce that we need, plus the infrastructure, and that's not even sort of looking at housing. I guess what is the necessary growth that we're going to need year on year to be able to fulfil this, given that there are some incredible lofty targets that have been set in terms of domestic housing builds versus huge, and I'm also from South Australia, huge government infrastructure projects as well. Is it even possible to achieve these things?
The delivery of all of the demand that all of the public sector and private sector wishes to build, as we've analysed in our report, it's not possible to deliver in the time frame that is projected. And that's a function of the fact that the system doesn't have total national visibility of everything that's occurring. So there's just demand. So what we do is add up all of that demand and provide that insight, and then decision makers, whether they're private or public sector, need to respond to that and better coordinate around. So it's a great example of the AUKUS investments. There are a lot of things going on in South Australia along with AUKUS. It's a similar story with Henderson in West Australia and the delivery of Westport, and there's desalination plants and other things going on as well. So it will be very challenging and will require a lot of coordination between different levels of government.
Are there recommendations that your agency is making in terms of, I guess, training up a workforce here and not just relying, but obviously by relying on higher migration numbers, you create further pressure, upward pressure on the housing market. So how do we train the workforce that we need here in Australia? Is that something that your agency is making recommendations to government on?
Absolutely. And I'll just turn to Ms Fox to give you some more detail in a sec. But the vast majority of the people who we will need to build this infrastructure, we will need to grow ourselves. The nature of our submission is we think that there's an opportunity to do some better alignment of the existing migration intake to skills that are needed in construction, but it will not be the silver bullet in any way, shape or form, and that is not what we're suggesting. But Ms Fox, did you want to talk a little bit about the training and culture and other aspects that we talk about?
Yeah, sure. So as Mr Kopp outlined, there's a range of levers that's available to government to boost that domestic workforce supply. That ranges from improved attraction and retention of workers into the sector. A big part of that is around improving the workforce culture and diversity and all the workforce settings, which is a major drag and a major blocker to women entering the construction infrastructure industry. There is work underway across governments to look at that. As Mr Kopp mentioned, for example, the construction industry culture standards. So that's one key lever that we think will have a marked improvement on keeping the workforce that we attract already in the sector. That is very key. The other thing is with the emerging skills needed, for example, increasing productivity, the use of digital tools and new technologies, we do see work underway across jurisdictions, piloting various skills programs to upskill the existing workforce. And we think there is a role also for all governments to work together to learn from each other, but also create that national consistency in how we're training and upskilling the existing domestic workforce.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question in terms of the long-term goals, or in terms of the reliance upon skilled migration? Do you ever see a period where we won't be reliant on skilled migration, and how do we get to that point? And I suspect, when you go back, Australia at the turn of the century, in the 50s, was growing immensely in terms of migration that was coming in, but it was permanent migration. Yet we didn't seem to have these challenges, even though the population was increasing very, very quickly. I'd say even at a faster pace than we're increasing today. Do you think that the solution could be in higher migration numbers as permanent migrants, which then gives us, and I'm talking long term, the ability to train people, to skill them up in different trades for construction, etc.? Do you see or envisage at some point how we get to a point where we're not reliant on skilled migration?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe the infrastructure and construction sector as reliant on skilled migration. It's a relatively limited amount that comes into the sector currently. But it would be great to get to a position where it was completely homegrown skills. There may be a need for specialist skills as we deliver, new types of infrastructure, or there was a big intake of permanent English and French and Spanish migrants over the last 15 years because we were going through a massive transport infrastructure boom, and they have already gone through a boom like that and have the skills to really drive some of that as well. But I think there are broader, more acute issues in the construction sector that make it relatively unattractive to new entrants to even get into it, and we're also seeing a lot of people leave the sector as well. I might just note as well that in some cases, particularly engineers, and Engineers Australia have done quite a bit of work on this, people come to Australia, very highly skilled people come to Australia and cannot work in their area of expertise, particularly engineers. So it's something like 40% of overseas engineers are working in a job outside of engineering. And some of that is around the way in which these Australian governments procure and have expectations of experience in the Australian sector. And it is preventing us from accessing a skilled migrant workforce. So there's some reforms to be done in procurement and just culture of how we procure projects at a public infrastructure level.
That procurement is specific to state governments and federal governments? Yeah, or is it?
It would be mostly. I mean, the Australian government delivers very little infrastructure itself. Yeah. Western Sydney Airport, Inland Rail, and kind of that's it. It would be state governments usually, and it's just completely fair enough to want to hire people that have experience in your jurisdiction, but it is potentially preventing us from accessing a skilled migrant workforce that is out there.
So are you noticing any change in that? And have there been made, if there's been submissions made to the state governments, etc., to focus in this area, which then ensures that we have more skilled people for these particular infrastructure jobs? Has there been discussions with state governments?
It's certainly a known issue and actively discussed. Ms. Fox, do you have anything to add on this?
On the recognition of the placing of skilled migrants, say for engineers, in the jobs that they're qualified, I know that there's certainly programs at the jurisdictional level, so states and territories, by transport, for example, transport delivery agencies working with the likes of, say, Engineers Australia to help those engineers and to place them in the roles, in the jobs that they are trained and qualified to do. Certainly at the moment they are program pilot level, but there certainly is work happening at jurisdictions. It is a known problem, and various delivery agencies are working to address that.
Okay. So, but that seems to be a huge problem if we have people that are skilled, but because of technicalities can't work in that area. From what I've heard, I think you said 40% of engineers are not working as engineers, correct?
Yeah, that's Engineers Australia data.
And in your mind, those engineers would be fully qualified and could do the work?
Well, I couldn't talk on behalf of Engineers Australia's data, but they are clearly recognising it as a key issue, and they have been working with state governments at least the pilot level, and they advocate on it publicly as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Just Mr. Caldwell, only because I can't see Mr. Caldwell. That's why I'm asking.
Thank you.
And
Sorry, just one
I'll
further.
go to Mr. Rebelo if you've got a question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we have a question on notice to to Jobs and Skills Australia on this point about who they consult with in relation to their sort of key stakeholder discussions. Were you included in that with Jobs and Skills Australia?
We work really actively with Jobs and Skills Australia. We have collaborated on reports around skills needs for particularly net zero skills, as a report that we did with Jobs and Skills Australia arranged by other people, and we are in very regular contact with them.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And the Jobs and Skills Council build skills, which is relevant for our sector.
Thank you. Mr. Rebelo.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that population growth driven by migration places some level of upward pressure on housing demand, especially in the short term. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I'm just interested in whether the department has provided advice to the government on whether the housing construction sector currently has the capacity to meet the level of housing demand that's generated by migration levels. Is that something that you do provide advice to the government on?
No. We mostly focus on what's called the hard economic infrastructure sectors, so that's water, telco, energy and transport. Yeah. We have done some work on, there was a debate happening a couple of years ago about whether the infrastructure pipeline was cannibalising the workforce from the housing pipeline. And we did a piece of analysis on that, which is in our market capacity report. And we found pretty limited evidence that people were moving in great numbers from housing into infrastructure. The Jobs and Skills Council for Build Skills, has also done a much deeper piece of analysis on that, and they have also found very limited evidence that there is switching occurring. People tend to stick in either the infrastructure sector or the housing sector going forward. But we haven't provided specific advice on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Being no further questions, I thank you very much for appearing before us today. Thank you for coming. If you've been, there's a couple of things that we've asked for, which if you can provide it to the committee for that information that we've asked, please send it to the Secretariat by Friday the 17th of April 2026. You'll be sent a transcript of today's evidence, and you'll also have an opportunity to request any corrections to that transcript if you feel there's been any errors. So thank you very much. We may call upon you again, and the committee will now take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:40. Thank you. That is ready to go? Yeah, excellent. I now welcome witnesses from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, Sport and Art to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? Thank you. Can you start off?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm Alison Todd, Acting First Assistant Secretary from the Regional Development, Northern Australia and Local Government Division of the Department.
Thank you.
So not quite as long as the department name, but almost. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
We just need that title. We'll go to the others and then we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
John Boundary, I'm the Acting Assistant Secretary for Regional Development and Local Government within the division.
James Hay-Hendry, Acting Director, Office of Northern Australia.
Excellent, thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submission to the inquiry. Before I invite you to make a short opening statement of a few minutes, and then we'll proceed to Q&A, we also have online with us Mr Rebelo, we have Mr Caldwell, and we have Cassandra Fernando, who's come back with us as well. On that point, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to appear before the committee, and I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Pay my respects to their elders. I've got a short opening statement. The department, although it doesn't play a direct role in managing migration, our role is supporting the sustainability and resilience of regional communities, which leads us to recognise the critical role that skilled migration has to powering the future growth and aspirations of regional economies. Through the department's work on local government policy, we understand the impact that workforce shortages have on councils' capacity to deliver essential services, particularly in regional, remote and First Nations communities. Through our engagement with Regional Development Australia committees and other regional stakeholders, we understand the criticality of a skilled workforce to the ambitions of regional businesses and communities. For Northern Australia, a highly remote and dispersed population with comparatively thin labour markets mean the region often experiences workforce constraints more acutely than other parts of the nation. Our submission highlights how regional frameworks, collaboration with local governments and regional organisations, and consideration of settlement and livability factors are central to ensuring skilled migration delivers lasting benefits for regional Australia. Today, the department is happy to share insights from our work with some of those key stakeholders to strengthen regional and local communities and support the committee's examination of skilled migration.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add anything further? No. I'll open up for questions and I might go to Mr Rebelo.
Hello, thank you. Thanks very much for appearing today. Can you tell me, in your view, does immigration place pressure on housing and infrastructure?
Well, I'm not sure that it's really something that we can comment on unless you would like to make a comment about that, John.
I would suggest, from our experience and our engagement with regional stakeholders in particular, there's most definitely the link around having infrastructure and housing available in order to attract migration. What we hear much less about is necessarily an impingement of migration upon that infrastructure, but there is most definitely a link between communities being able to attract those skilled workforces and having relevant social and housing infrastructure in place in order to do so.
So we just heard from Infrastructure Australia, who conceded that population growth driven by migration does place upward pressure on housing demand in the short run or in the short term. Is that something you'd agree with? Would you agree with Infrastructure Australia on that?
It's not something the department necessarily has evidence to comment on. Those are relatively specialised areas which fall outside of our immediate portfolio.
Right, okay. Has the department done any modelling on whether or not there's that link between migration and infrastructure, for example, congestion times, the timing of key infrastructure projects, whether that needs to be brought forward or not?
I think that would have to be something that we would take on notice. We're obviously one small part of a very large department, and so we, in the area that we're responsible for, wouldn't have undertaken that type of work, but it's not to say that potentially other areas of the department have or have not. We would have to check that.
Great, thank you. We'd appreciate if you could come back to us on that.
Okay.
I'll ask Ms Fernando if she's got a question, because she missed out in the last batch. Ms Fernando, are you online?
I do have a question, Chair. Give me 1 second. 1 sec, check. I just had to pull over because I do have a question. The question is...
We can't. You sound fairly muffled, Miss Fernando. Can you
hear me now? Can you hear me better?
Bit better, little bit. If you can go closer to the phone so we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So, does Australia's skilled migration program adequately take into account the increased demand for infrastructure and housing? And if not, how could it be improved?
Again, I'm not sure if that's something that we are able to answer, because the Department of Home Affairs is responsible for, I think, taking into consideration what issues may inform their skilled migration policies. So I'm not sure that that's something that we have the ability to answer for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Miss Louise Miller-Frost.
Thank you. In terms of the, particularly the regional areas, what are the particular industries that you are finding are a particular focus for you in terms of attracting skilled migrants, some areas that are particularly problematic? And then my follow-up question is, we've had a little bit of information about designated area migration agreements, or those sorts of things where people are required to do a certain period in a regional area. We've also heard the criticism that okay, so they stay for 3 years and then they go off to the city. Is that your experience? Are there particular industries that happens in, and is there a solution to it? So that's a whole series of questions.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think in answer to your first question, there are it depends on the region and what industry or what growth is happening in that region as to what the skills might be. So it's hard to make a kind of broad comment. I don't know if... Do you have anything to say in relation to or do you have any examples for particular regional areas that you want to comment on in terms of demand for skilled labour?
Not with regard to specific regions, but one of the things that perhaps we can comment on is certainly in the local government space, and the House Committee for Regional Development, Transport and Infrastructure at the moment is exploring fiscal sustainability within the local government sector, and a number of submissions there have raised access to skilled workforce as a primary issue, particularly in regional areas. Typically we're seeing that in relation to planners and civil engineers, those sort of broader industrial piece, which ties into then that civil infrastructure and housing availability component, and the challenges that local governments are having both in attracting those workers, but then also the recognition that a lot of these skilled areas are now operating on a sort of national labour market approach, particularly in the planning space, where there is competition between the regions and the cities, which you alluded to in your question. I think from our point of view, our engagement and the support that we provide is often tailored to that location. Particularly our engagement with the Regional Development Australia committees, where, and if you're unfamiliar with them, there are 50 RDAs, as we call them, across the country, which engage across state and territory, local government and Commonwealth agencies, as well as with business and non-profit entities, to identify the sort of regional strategies within a place. There are a couple of examples within Arana and the Pilbara where RDAs are actually the designated representative for the Dharmas, as you're talking about there, and sort of take that leading role in driving that kind of regional migration. Some of the evidence that we've received through our engagement with the Regional Australia Institute sort of points to that retention piece you were talking about, and really, as we mentioned previously, the need for local infrastructure and local services to be able to retain those migrants who do come in through those agreements. So where we're having that influx, the retention, if you like, of that migration really does depend on the services that the local region are able to develop. And this is an increasing focus for RDAs and in those sort of place-based strategic approaches to look at, well, what is the long-term strategy and how do we build those services that make people want to stay? But unfortunately, I don't have any evidence which would articulate specific industries, because as Ms. Todd has pointed out, it really does vary geographically across the country, and depending on what are the in-need industries within those regional places.
So beyond the actual legal agreement that requires a skilled migrant to stay in a place, and I absolutely recognise the importance of having local infrastructure, including school, good schools, good hospital, all that sort of thing. Is there any other mechanism, any other way that we can encourage people to stay?
Yeah, I mean, talking from my experience working in the arts, which is also part of our department, providing a cultural life and support is actually also a critical part of encouraging people to become and feel part of a community, so that they can share culture, be immersed in culture that is in the community that surrounds them. So that there are a range of services that are provided by local councils and other organisations within a community that make the livability of a region attractive, not purely from an employment point of view, but for families and supporting children who are part of that as well, and playing a more fuller life, let's say, in the community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I go to Senator Bligh next, very quickly, and I asked the same question of the witnesses before, which was Infrastructure Australia. In South Australia, we have massive AUKUS build, 6 submarines over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Defence build with defence ships being built. The projection is that we're going to need 30,000 workers to feed the industry, not to feed physically food, but to feed everything from manufacturing to supporting the industry to the actual build itself, up to 10,000 workforce. When this happens, obviously there's infrastructure obviously has a shortfall as it is at the moment with skills. When you have massive projects as well taking place, it then sucks out people who out of different areas and different industries, including housing, including transport infrastructure as well. Have you envisaged this, and are you looking at how this could be rectified, or a smooth sail over the next 5 to 10 years in South Australia specifically?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure that we're the right people to answer that question, just because of the specific area that we work in, which is the regional development and local government space. We did talk...
But there will be, sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay.
For example, in South Australia, in Adelaide, that's where the build's taking place, and I know the Defence Department, state governments are all in control of that. But what that will do is suck out from our regional areas
the impact
people.
then.
So there will be an impact in your area.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm wondering whether you're talking with the different departments, if plans are being put in place, how we're going to do this in terms of without impacting in those regional areas.
I absolutely take that point.
I'm conscious from previous engagement in other roles around the work that happens between infrastructure and transport ministers to align some of this. I think that might be a question that is best if we take on notice and refer to some of our infrastructure colleagues who may have a much clearer view in terms of some of that overall strategic planning.
It would be good to see if there has been any planning done, because I don't think there's any other project in Australia at this point in time envisaged bigger than the defence build in South Australia, and perhaps in WA a bit as well, which then will have an impact on every single regional area, not just in South Australia but around the country. So if there's been any modelling or reports or any thought of conducting a report into how we're going to manage it, it would be good for this committee to be aware of it. Thank you. Senator Bligh.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I guess I will try and figure out what you are able to talk to us about by going into regional infrastructure. So I'm assuming as part of that you are identifying opportunities and challenges within the regions, and particularly this is an inquiry about skilled migration and how that relates. So in terms of the work that you are doing and the advice that you are providing to local councils, obviously housing is an issue in the regions. Is that fair to say? It provides a challenge for people to get them to move to the regions?
Yeah, well, I think public discourse is very clear on that issue. Yes.
Okay, so we're clear on that.
Yeah.
So in terms of when we've got skilled migrants coming in, and we've heard from other people providing evidence, other departments, that there are key areas, health, education, just to name sort of two priorities. They are also shortages in the regions. So I guess from your perspective, that link between that migration levels, the levels of housing and infrastructure that we have in the regions. There are some regions in South Australia where there is no freshwater utilities that be connected. What is the advice that you are providing to government around migration levels? If your role is purely looking at regional development, what are the challenges? What are you asking them for? What recommendations are you making?
I think it's fair to say that we draw on the networks of the local regions that we do talk to regularly, and that we and to represent their interests in the considerations of those other departments who are responsible for particular things like housing, housing infrastructure, whether it's to do with water, transport, those types of things. I'm not sure if you want to talk just a little bit about how we draw on or connect with the issues that are being raised through our local council networks and then through the regional development, the RDA committees as well.
Certainly, and I think I would make clear that certainly from our part of the portfolio, we don't make specific recommendations around migration.
Can I ask what is your remit then within the department?
So a key aspect for how we work in this space is connecting local bodies. So as I mentioned with the Regional Development Australia committees, that's a key example of how government through the regional portfolio will facilitate conversations across all three levels of government to be able to engage on those local place-based and empowering those place-based decisions. So our role would very much be around connecting the right organisations together to be able to support that conversation and identify what those migration needs are in a region. Typically, we would see that advice then being driven into state and territory government, which would drive the actual place-based migration plans, and then further engagement between those plans and the Department of Home Affairs with its responsibility for migration overall. So our role is much more about facilitating the conversation than providing the end advice.
Okay. So in terms of when you're facilitating and coordinating between government departments and levels of government, what would you say would you say that the level of migration at the moment is putting pressure on housing in the regional areas?
As I said earlier, the engagement that we've had with our stakeholders suggests that there's an issue with infrastructure not necessarily encouraging migration in the way that local communities would hope for, that perhaps a lack of housing availability in some locations is preventing skilled migration. The conversations that we're having are based on attracting people rather than necessarily any concerns over too many people coming into a region, if that makes sense.
So you're, and I think this is something that we're seeing in terms of being able to attract teachers, medical professionals, nurses, childcare workers, all of those sorts of even care workers to regions. Housing is a huge problem, and that's not that if you leave migration out of it, but you can't make recommendations from your department to say we would recommend utility infrastructure, even though you sit in the Department of Infrastructure.
So again, things like...
You can't make those recommendations, it seems.
Things like utility infrastructure are a state and territory responsibility, so the Commonwealth doesn't have that direct responsibility there. What we do, however, through programs like the Regional Precincts Partnership Program, through the Growing Regions Program, etc., is provide infrastructure funding, which can then be made available to local governments and state and territory governments for them to build that infrastructure. But primarily that infrastructure is a state and territory responsibility. So we as the department
co-fund with federal funding. The states can't afford to do that themselves.
Absolutely, but the decision on that building and that
100%. But I guess it's whether you, in all of these connections that you're making, are making those recommendations on where that federal funding is best placed.
We don't necessarily make the recommendations about those things. However, we do have responsibilities in providing advice so that when government is making decisions across a whole broad spectrum of issues, that there is a regional voice considered in that decision-making process. So we draw on the knowledge of our networks, whether it is through local councils or whether it's through local communities that we're engaged with through the RDA network, that if government is considering policy decisions across a range of issues, that those issues are part of that consideration.
Can I just add to that? So just to get our heads around it, so you respond to governments when they're making a decision or providing a plan for a policy, for example. You'll then come in and respond to that?
Yeah, we would represent the interests of the impact, I guess, of regional areas.
So in terms of seeking future outcomes, reports, etc., prior to anything being proposed by government, that you guys don't look at that area? So you only respond to what government's doing?
No, I'm saying that we would make sure that the voices and the impacts that are correct, yes. Yeah.
And that's the responsibility of
reflection.
So I was just trying to get my
head.
I'm
trying to get my head around it as well.
So there are a couple of components here which might be useful for me to...
Just very quickly, you identify that there needs a new road to be built in XYZ regional local government area. Will you then go to government and say, look, this is something that is an area that needs looking at, or do you wait for government to come to you and say, we've spoken with the regional local government and we're going to put a road in this area, how does this impact?
We're not involved at that micro level, I would suggest, on particular things like a road.
No, I'm using it as a
I know,
very,
yes.
So we might provide advice to government on general settings around where there is need at that larger
So what kind of need? Can I just drill down? Need of what?
Often. So,
for instance, not roads.
it could be community infrastructure. Roads for us would come from our transport colleagues, which is a different part of our department, and you know, they will provide advice on that transport infrastructure.
Community centre.
But not necessarily community centres, but around a broader need for community infrastructure, for instance. So our engagements with local governments, they might come to us and say, we're having real challenges in being able to provide social cohesion infrastructure, for instance.
What is that? What is social cohesion infrastructure? Sorry.
It could be community centres, it could be sports centres.
It could be a library, a gallery, a performing arts centre.
that
Okay,
kind
but
of
not houses. So a gallery, but not houses.
Housing.
Can I just get that?
Yeah, and housing sits within Treasury, so Treasury has responsibility for housing, so
Okay.
that's not something that we would necessarily...
Water infrastructure? Do you
look at.
provide advice on?
We don't provide advice
Okay.
because that is a state and territory responsibility.
But you're not going to represent that a community might need water, but you'll recommend that they need a gallery or make a
And again, we won't
representation?
make recommendations.
Sorry,
on a community.
representations?
I might just
for a
add to
community
what
centre?
Mr. Bowdry's saying. From Northern Australia perspective, we wouldn't necessarily hold the pen in terms of decisions being made, but we're advocating on behalf of stakeholders in Northern Australia.
Yeah, okay.
So if there's a question around, say, water infrastructure in Cairns, we would be advocating on this local stakeholders'
So you
behalf,
will
but
be
we're
a-
not making a decision.
But the Northern Territory will, but not anywhere else. That's what it's
So
sounding
Northern
like to me.
Australia
This is
across
Northern Australia.
the whole
Northern
of sort of
Australia.
Northern WA, Northern Territory,
Okay.
Northern Queensland.
Right. But what about the South? Who's representing those?
So from a regional
Yeah,
perspective.
so again, in that regional space, we have engagement with our state and territory colleagues, and we have engagement with the local government sector, as well as the information that we hear directly from Regional Development Australia committees. We will then collate that to understand a general sense of what are the relevant needs across regional Australia, for which then we might provide advice at that generalised level. But it will be for states and territories and those local partners to actually identify their individual needs.
Can I just drill down into that? So it's not on, and forgive me because I assumed infrastructure. So it's really not on water, roads, housing. It's more community based, community centres, sporting facilities. So is that a fair? That's what I'm.
Our particular part of the
Give us an
portfolio.
example of an infrastructure project that you would be involved in.
Yeah, so the department overall, and like our infrastructure colleagues, are in the space of supporting the building of airports, of major roads, of trains, networks, etc. The department has historically, through the housing support program, supported local governments to be able to provide infrastructure which would support housing. That portfolio has now moved over to Treasury. As part of our portfolio in the regional development space, there are grant programs available which would support a range of activities, from the provision of community infrastructure through
Give
to
us one of those activities.
I'm not responsible for those programs, so I'd have to come back to you on those.
We just want to know what sort of projects you...
So it's sounding like it's sort of community. So it's just so you are not necessarily then identifying and saying we're going to advocate, not provide advice, but say telecommunications infrastructure is something I would say is vital for regional communities. That's not something.
Not in the space that we have responsibility for, but we do have colleagues in the department that do actually look after telecommunications and in particular the regional infrastructure.
So that's separate from
I can see, Mr. Rebelo, you will get your opportunity to make
Sorry, and
From a regional economic development perspective, I would just add in quickly, there is quite a large remit, but again, we're providing policy advice to government and supporting the Ministers for Northern Australia. So from directly in terms of the housing question, we would highlight issues in particular regions across the north. Our regional colleagues might highlight regional issues generally across the country, but our remit, we would sort of highlight issues for consideration of government in developing those policies. So that's sort of how we're providing that advice.
Thank you. Mr. Rebelo.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of this committee is to inquire and report into Australia's skilled migration program, and in particular we're looking at the effectiveness of the current migration settings while recognising the ongoing need for housing and infrastructure. It sounds from what we've heard that there's perhaps somebody else in the department that we should be hearing from. Can you give us sort of some information as to who you think we should be speaking to? Is there a particular section of the department we should be speaking to who can assist us with those questions on infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to come back to you. I'd need to make some inquiries about who the right person is, but we can definitely liaise with the Secretariat to make sure that you know who those people are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I will try and get my questions to a narrow scope that I think you can probably try and address as best I can. So, Ms. Todd, I think if I'm listening to what you've said, you sort of, in summary, you highlight a need based on information that you absorb and you bring in, and you might talk to other departments about that. So, putting to one side the public discourse that you talked about earlier, what is your views and the department's position in relation to whether or not there is a need for housing in order for the regions to develop?
I'll just check with my colleague. I don't think we covered we didn't cover that issue in the submission, right? No. So I don't think that we would necessarily have an opinion formed on that issue. I would apologise to the committee. We made a submission to you that was quite focused on the area that we have responsibility for, and so that was the I guess what we thought we would need to answer questions on. So I apologise that we're not prepared to answer questions on other areas that our colleagues have responsibility for.
The right questions as well, but as you can see, we're conducting the inquiry into skilled migration.
Yes.
So all the areas, regional development,
Absolutely.
all of these things play a big role
Yes.
in the recommendations that we will come up with.
Yes.
So any bit of information
Yes.
is very valuable to us. And we do appreciate your submission to the inquiry. I suppose what we want to know is what skills will be required. How do we make it? How do we streamline it so industry that requires those skills that doesn't currently have them can get those skills?
Yep.
And thirdly, how do we get to a point where we're not reliant, and maybe that'll never come, that we're not reliant on skilled migration, by training, by increasing our population, and by doing things, other mechanisms that are in place. So I suppose that's the basic thinking behind the inquiry,
Yep.
And certainly your submission is very valuable to us. And any thoughts that you may have in those areas that I've just touched upon, and especially regional migration, we're finding that people are coming as skilled migrants to regional areas. Majority then move out within the 2 to 3 year period, leaving a gap again. Not in all cases, but in a lot of areas. So I suppose if you could just, any areas that I just touched upon that you have input into would be very beneficial for us. And it doesn't have to be today. If you come up with something else that perhaps we've discussed today, I'll ask if there's, if you want to respond to what I've just said. And
I guess, and I'm also conscious of Mr. Caldwell's question.
Yes.
And while Ms. Todd kind of puts that it's not necessarily something that we ourselves are analysing, what I can say is our engagement with stakeholders would support the assertion that housing is absolutely crucial to driving migration, both housing and the provision of local community infrastructure to support that broader social piece. For our engagement, I guess, there's an awful lot which comes down to local, regional strategies about how do we draw in the skills which will build that infrastructure, which will build those houses, which will be able to, for instance, in the local government space, be able to articulate that planning task and as well to sort of grow industries strategically in that space. We will certainly be able to do some exploration for you to be able to provide some insight on where our stakeholders are pointing on certain places and where they've identified some of those plans, but we'd probably need to take that on notice, I think.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? Having no further questions, I thank you for your input today. And thanks for coming. Very valuable information, especially through the submission that you've made. And if you've been asked, as you have been, to provide some additional information, please send it to the Secretariat if you can by Friday the 17th, 2026. You'll also be sent a transcript of today's evidence, and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to the if there's any transcription errors that you feel need to be. We may call upon you again, but thank you very much for your submission and for appearing before our committee today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're 3 minutes ahead of time. Wow.
Well, Chair.
We now have our next witnesses. Unless someone wants a 2-minute break, I doubt it. I think we'll go straight into the next witnesses. Thank you. Are they here? Yeah. Regional Capitals Australia and National Growth Areas, correct? And one online. Okay. I now welcome the representatives to Regional Capitals Australia and National Growth Areas Alliance to give evidence. Thank you. So we've got 1, 2 and 1 online as well. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity which you appear before the committee? Just that at this point. Thank you.
Bronwyn Clark, Chief Executive Officer of the National Growth Areas Alliance.
Welcome.
Rachel Sweeney, Secretariat, Regional Capitals Australia.
Welcome to the committee.
And Josh Black, Chair of Regional Capitals Australia.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and it attracts parliamentary privilege. Thank you for your submissions to the inquiry, and now I invite you to make a short opening statement of just a couple of minutes, and then we'll open up to a brief discussion, as you saw previously, a Q&A. Over to you. Thank you.
Josh will be giving our statement.
Thank you.
Yep, I can do
Mr.
that.
Black,
Thank you very much for the. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Chair and committee members, really appreciate the opportunity to appear today and for your inquiry. Regional Capitals Australia represents 21 regional capital cities across the country. These cities serve the economic, service and education hubs of the surrounding regions. Every day around 9 million Australians rely on regional capital cities to access healthcare, childcare, education, transport and government services, and collectively these cities generate more than $225 billion in economic activity every year. For our member cities, skilled migration is not a supplementary workforce strategy, it has become essential. Across Australia, we're facing a persistent and structural skills shortage. Employers in healthcare, aged care, early childhood, construction, hospitality, local government and professional services are all struggling to fill roles, even in the context of historically low unemployment. In many regions, there's simply no local workforce to meet the demand. Skilled migrants play a critical role in sustaining essential services, supporting businesses and enabling regional communities to grow. Too often, policies focus on attracting migrants without ensuring the conditions exist for them and their families to settle successfully and remain in the regions long term. In many regional communities, workers arrive to fill critical roles but leave within a few years due to housing shortages, limited settlement services, or having stronger opportunities in larger cities. However, while migration is vital to regional Australia, current migration settings are not delivering the outcomes that regional communities need and desire. Our submission highlights several reforms that could be implemented to improve outcomes. The first is the definition of regional Australia. That really needs to be refined. Currently, all areas outside of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane are classified as regional, meaning genuine regional cities compete directly with the larger capitals such as Perth, Adelaide, Darwin and Canberra for workers. Migration incentives should better target the communities experiencing the most acute workforce shortages. Secondly, designated migration area agreements remain an important tool. but they require reform. Simplifying the system and providing stronger support for regional authorities and employers would improve access and uptake of this scheme. Thirdly, national occupation lists must better reflect regional labour market realities, particularly in sectors like healthcare, childcare, hospitality and local government services. And finally, migration policy must place greater emphasis on settlement and retention. So that's the housing availability, community infrastructure and settlement supports are crucial to ensuring migrants can build stable lives and remain in regional communities. Regional capitals stand ready to support Australia's growth. With the right policy settings, skilled migration can strengthen regional economies, sustain essential services and help deliver more balanced population growth across the whole country. So thank you, and I look forward to the committee's questions later.
Thank you. I'll ask your colleagues, Ms Clark or Ms Sweeney, if there's anything you'd like to...
Ms Clark's from a different
organisation.
Very short.
Yes. Thank you for this opportunity, Chair. The National Growth Areas Alliance is a group of local governments in fast-growing outer suburban areas across Australia. Our criteria for a growth area is the location on the outskirts of capital cities. We have at least 2% population growth per annum and predominantly greenfield housing development, residential development. Collectively, we're 5.8 million people, that's 1 in 5 Australians live in a growth area, and we are very culturally diverse and very young, lots of young families. 33% of our residents were born overseas compared to 27% nationally, and 29% of our residents speak a language other than English at home compared to 22% nationally. Growth area, local government areas are 5% of all LGAs across Australia, but we have accommodated 35% of recent population growth, and we will deliver 26% of housing accord targets. The key issue for us in this inquiry is the importance of aligning Commonwealth, state and local government infrastructure pipelines and delivery to match where populations are settling, and to then support local government in supporting new communities as they arrive.
Thank you.
No, I'm happy with Mayor Black's statement.
Excellent. Okay, we might open up for Q&A. I'll kick off with a couple of questions. Obviously, you've mentioned housing and different infrastructure constraints are a barrier to skilled migrants settling in regional areas. In terms of, we're hearing that quite a bit, and we're hearing that governments, whether they be state governments, federal governments, should take that into account when trying to fill skilled employment in particular regional areas. What's being done about it at the moment? Anything? Is there any models? Is there discussions taking place with what infrastructure is required? Is there a structural set up for discussions between regional government, state governments, federal governments, in terms of specifically looking at areas that need an intake of skilled migration but can't get it because it's been identified that certain infrastructure and housing are not in place?
I think...
Or is it just something that we say, oh, we don't have the housing, therefore we're not getting the migrants, the skilled workforce?
I don't think it's as tied together as you are putting to me at the moment. So basically, Regional Capitals has identified a range of areas where we believe that the government could better invest in our communities, and it ranges from a very long list, of course. But some of the key ones are obviously housing enabling infrastructure. So each of our member cities will have a housing enabling requirement. We, like the growth areas, have greenfield areas that can be developed for housing, and we have a different set, I suppose, of issues than the metropolitan areas because that greenfield does require, enabling infrastructure. And in and above that, there is a requirement to deliver sort of connectivity infrastructure. So the telecommunications issues are, improving across our communities, but are still prevailing across regional Australia. There is also a need to invest in sort of the key road infrastructure and airport infrastructure as well. And so they are some of the key things that we know that our communities need to continue to support a growing community, which all of our members are very happy to do. We want our cities to grow. I think the other part of the issue, which is articulated in our submission too, is the supporting services once immigrants come into our communities, and that is obviously a key challenge. So obviously there are challenges across our communities with health, access to early childhood education, and those sorts of issues also require a sort of additional lens when you're dealing with newly arrived members into our communities. So language and cultural services often are really kind of not available to support them in the way that they should be.
The other question I have before going on to my colleagues is, are you guys aware of any current measures being undertaken to communicate the public understanding and awareness of the value of skilled migration in particular regional areas? Is there any public campaigns, and what is the attitude in a lot of the regional areas? Have you done any studies or seen it, or is there any, I don't want to use the term education, but the positives of skilled migration in a particular regional town?
I think what you'll find in a lot of regional communities is a broad understanding of the need. The broad understanding of the need for immigration. So
there is an understanding of the need.
Absolutely. In hospitals, in your coffee shop, my local pub in Wagga Wagga is, I would say, almost completely staffed in the kitchen area with, cooks from newly arrived immigrants. And I think also too, we are sort of, the meatworks in our area is very well supported by the Palm project, which is bringing people in from the Pacific Islands. So I think there is a broad understanding of that, but I think the tension is building around housing, and I'm sure Mayor Black, who is the Mayor of Dubbo, would also be able to sort of articulate that as well. But we do have land to grow. What we don't have is enabling infrastructure to do that, and local government is, our communities are supported by local governments that aren't as large as the metropolitan ones. Their additional revenue streams don't necessarily support the ability to get that infrastructure in place, and that's why we are heavily advocating towards both state and federal government for the need for that enabling infrastructure, because you cannot build houses without immigrants. We've obviously got a construction shortage in Australia, so there is I think the tension is building just around some of those issues, because rental availabilities across our member cities sit somewhere from sort of 0.2% to 1% availability, and the price of housing is rapidly increasing.
Could I just add to that from a metropolitan perspective? For growth area councils are also facing enabling infrastructure challenges. So in growth areas for the past 10 years, every year we've built between 51 and 61,000 homes. And that's a pretty constant figure and will continue that way. At the moment, there's around 86,000 homes that cannot be developed simply because of the lack of enabling infrastructure. We're talking about sewerage, potable water, stormwater, electricity, and they are completely restrained by those state-level lack of resourcing to meet a Commonwealth target of the Housing Accord.
So when you say lack of resources to build that infrastructure, skilled work, materials, what is it?
It would be strategic planning from the state.
Okay.
So it seems there's this disconnect between Commonwealth and state around where housing will be built, so where population will grow, and who's going to fund the enabling infrastructure to be able to build the house.
And it takes me to my last point. As regional councils and local government, do you finding that they're tapping into the HAF funding? Because I know in metropolitan areas, a lot of the councils are tapping into the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Yeah, it's very much oversubscribed. So oversubscribed. Round 3 opened, and I think was oversubscribed within 2 or 3 days of it being open.
Yeah.
We are interested, but that is predominantly a partnership with state governments or with community housing providers, so it's not directly to local government.
Okay, but it does fill the housing shortage in areas where they're successful. It may
To a small degree, because that's more social and affordable housing, rather than the large-scale greenfield development that we specialise in.
Affordable social housing and market price housing as well in the three, in all the projects. So that is one way of getting infrastructure in. And I know in Adelaide, for example, I know that lots of councils have actually submitted and have starting projects in partnerships with NGOs and other things as well.
We met with Housing Australia a couple of weeks ago to encourage our members to be involved, but again, it's oversubscribed substantially.
And I think there is a sort of a positive view is provided once the land is made available for some of those projects as well. If the councils can come forward with land, then that is usually seen as the most pleasing sort of application that can come forward, and not everyone has the ability just to have free land available for that particular process.
Thank you. Senator Blythe.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll just pick up a little bit on what you're saying. And we've had a development done in Adelaide where water was being trucked in and sewage was being trucked out because the infrastructure wasn't there. So I think this is really interesting to talk about the barriers that are existing, and particularly we've just heard from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, Communication, Sport and Arts. And it was really interesting. Have you, particularly Ms Sweeney, had anything to do with that particular department? Because they have been tasked with being a voice for regional communities across the country.
So we do engage with the department across sort of a range of measures, and I think one of the structural issues at the moment with the state and the federal government is there was a program that was in existence called the Housing Support Package, which was directly available to local government to apply for, and it was significantly oversubscribed. Some of our members were very successful in getting access to that, and that has been highly beneficial. Part of our pitch back to government is we'd like to see some more funding in that particular pot. There are obviously strong negotiations going on between the states, but that doesn't include local government. And I think particularly in regional areas, we know that a lot of the state governments have infill density appetite, and that is something that they're particularly chasing. So their housing strategies are largely enforcing a density infill in the metropolitan areas, which is problematic for our particular areas where if the states and the feds are doing negotiation around where housing enabling funds could be put in place, that's not necessarily something where regional projects are getting a massive oversight or coming forward as part of that negotiation. We certainly make that case. We've done that with Mayor Black this week up here. We are ready to grow. We have the ability to get more houses built. We don't have the funding to enable that to happen. So we would love some more housing enabling direct to local government ability to be funded.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess just going into the skilled migrants, and obviously it is really important for particularly regional communities, and you've mentioned a few of the industries that we need them in, but it sounds like the block is housing. So it's a slightly different problem to what we have in the big cities where people can come, and I've heard stories of people living in caravans in regional communities, teachers, healthcare workers, ambulance drivers, because there is just zero housing available for them.
There is a massive challenge with that at the moment.
So, and I guess in the city we're sort of seeing a slightly different issue. So for you guys, I think the most important, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but it's you need that critical infrastructure that goes with housing. So water, sewerage, electricity, telecommunications. You can build the houses, but at the moment it's that critical infrastructure piece that seems to be missing, because you've got land, Is that fair?
It's missing from
Is that fair to?
That is one of the biggest challenges. I would say, though, that with the immigration system, there are challenges with that, which we articulated in our submission, which I do think, obviously, Josh has touched on as well. And there is the ability to attract skilled migrants into our region, and we firmly believe that skilled migration should target regional Australia is problematic when, if a migrant is given the opportunity. I think purely, the opportunity to live in a big city is often appealing to those newly arrived migrants, because there's a lot more, cultural communities that represent where they've come from in those areas as well. What we're sort of seeing is real success factors do take place where we have a community of interest around, a certain population. You often see that in the refugee space. So when refugees come to Australia, they're often brought in and they get distributed into sort of regional areas in quite a large sort of footprint. And they want to stay because they have their community members around them. The other problem I think also too is, if you come from an international place, you wouldn't necessarily, pick Wagga because you wouldn't know where Wagga is to arrive here, or Dubbo, you wouldn't necessarily know where that was. But where we can have systems like Dharma's, which is bespoke to the regional need, to the ability of the employers in that region to specifically target skill sets, we know that those sorts of bespoke arrangements or purely regional visas have been really important. And I think, we've got some real challenges across the regions, particularly in health and also in early childhood education and, in the broader sort of construction and mining sector. And the economy does really run off a lot of the primary production that we see across Australia in regional areas. So, targeted skill migration programs are fundamental, not only to regional Australia, but obviously to Australia's interests as well.
And then to not compete against, like Adelaide is considered a regional,
That's right.
considered
that
regional
is one of the
for
key
the purposes. Okay.
Yeah, components of it.
Yeah.
And, a skilled migrant might know where Adelaide is, but they may not know where Dubbo is, and yet Dubbo is a perfectly delightful place to live.
Yeah. Do you think that one of those barriers is, I guess, if you've got rental availability at below 1% or below, is that a disincentive, do you think, because I guess you're going to go where it's sort of easy to get your kid enrolled into school, have childcare available, all of those, because a lot of these migrants are coming with families, which is great, but you can sort of see, is that part of it too? So which bit do we fix? And that's the hard thing, right? So you need people to work, to have a vibrant community, but at the same time, you need houses and facilities.
And I understand the point you're trying to make. Yeah. I guess what we would sort of say at the moment is that every single one of Regional Capitals Australia's members would have a housing project that could get underway with some funds injected through enabling infrastructure. So we don't see it in either or. What we see is we are ready to grow. We just don't have the dollars, the scale currently to be able to do that. And that would help ease the squeeze around the current housing structure. But I would also reinforce that regional communities do understand the need for skilled migration. They want them. But, if it comes down to, that housing issue at the moment, they also want somewhere to live as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll go to Ms Fernando, who's indicated she has a question. Ms Fernando?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first question is, in your view, how can the local labour market, how can the local labour market needs to be better reflected in Australia's skilled migration program, 1, and 2, how can the federal Labor government support local councils to facilitate living settings which are able to attract and retain skilled migrants?
Yes, yep, sure. So thank you for the question, Ms Fernando. In terms of the local labour market better reflecting local need, we would like to see, and I suppose it comes back a little bit to Senator Blythe's point before around it's sort of the chicken and egg scenario. So over 200,000 people choose to move to a growth area every year.
Sorry, how many?
200,000.
200,000.
Yeah. So our population increases by that much every year, and we haven't caught up with local jobs or local economic growth. So we're creating and perpetuating a situation where people do live a long commute from employment centres, and they're not often don't have the capacity for public transport or good transport connections as they move in, because these are brand new communities being built in paddocks, really. So I think there's a real solution, and local government does some great work. A lot of our members have fantastic programs of targeting local employment initiatives, particularly for underrepresented groups. So I think that's definitely an area where we could see local government being supported to play more of a role in economic development programs, and to have a migration program that does respond to those local needs. And some of our members are very heavily involved with AUKUS, with around Bradfield, the new international airport, all those sorts of major national strategic priorities. And so we need to support local employment in those areas as well.
Ms. Fernando?
One of the other things is I have one of the largest growing LGAs in the country. I am from the city of Casey, so I look after the majority of the city of Casey. So it's projected within 5 years' time, it's going to grow up to about another 15%. Local jobs are really, really important. Besides funding for federal government, what else can we do as local federal MPs to ensure there is local jobs, better infrastructure for our communities, like people that live down in Clyde that don't have much infrastructure? What else can local members like myself can do or advocate for?
We have lots of ideas that we'd happily share with you, Ms. Fernando. And in fact, the National Growth Areas Alliance is based out of the city of Casey in Narre Warren. So we understand those challenges really well. I would say that there is a significant amount of advocacy in the transformational infrastructure projects that could be funded. So around southeast Melbourne, it could be major road or rail infrastructure that facilitates access to employment zoned land, and then which will encourage investment for industries to develop in those geographical areas. There are so many pinch points where a road or a freeway interchange or a rail connection could open up thousands of jobs, but federal funding for those pinch points is missing, and we're out of sequence with where people are moving to, where housing is being built, where people are moving to, and where employment land is accessible and ready for investment. So love to think that local growth area MPs could be advocating for that sort of infrastructure investment, and also tap into, for example, digital infrastructure becoming an essential utility as well. We have really strong home-based business, remote working possibilities, and especially, as you know, Ms. Fernando, in Clyde, there are some issues around even using your mobile phone in a new estate. So there are certainly those areas where we think MPs could really advocate for the area for infrastructure investment.
Ms. Fernando? I think that's it. If I could just add to that, we spoke about connectivity with digital connectivity, roads, etc., infrastructure, making it more attractive. What about social infrastructure? In other words, planning laws, licensing laws, that make it a more vibrant place. And I've seen regional councils that have just turned it around and are now sort of vibrant, active neighbourhoods. Just thinking of Prospect in South Australia, which 15 years ago, you'd go up Prospect Road and every shop was shut. There was nothing happening. You go to it now and it's just every night there's everything from cinemas, bars, restaurants, there's activity, and it's driven people to actually move in to that area, and now being one of the most sought after suburbs in Adelaide. And I take it local government does think of these things, but one of the points in regional areas is that social activity, the lack of social activity. Very few towns now have cinemas. There might be a pub, and that's about it. But that's an area that all three tiers should be working on to try and turn that around.
Well, far be it from me to speak on livability infrastructure when I have a highly qualified mayor to speak on that. Josh, did you want to pick up on that? I mean, you're very qualified to speak
Thanks,
Mr. Black.
Josh?
Yeah, I can do that. Just a couple of points. If we didn't have basically Indian subcontinent migration in, I know from Dubbo and Western New South Wales, there'd be no one to run the sewer and water plants at local councils, so we're very dependent on sewer and water technicians and engineers in Western New South Wales, and I suspect that that's repeated right across the breadth of regional Australia. And another one locally here is Filipino aged care workers. There's so many Filipino people work in aged care around the Dubbo region, and that's probably replicated throughout the country as well. I was just going to make it, we said about the Dharmas before. With those, there's talk about the Dharma in New South Wales also including coastal regions, and that would make it very difficult for inland regional to recruit skilled workers through that program, whereas are you going to come to Dubbo or are you going to go to Ballina, for instance? You might go to Wagga, the Paris of inland New South Wales, but Dubbo might struggle to, in places like that, compete against coastal regions. In Dubbo, for example, we have a very active, we're about nearly 50,000 people, really active subcontinental community called Orascon, the Indian subcontinent. All the Bangladeshis, they just all band together and have lots of festivals. We've even had 2 Holi festivals the last 2 weekends. We had a Nepalese one, then we had like a Punjabi one, and everyone just joined in. So those are the sort of things that really help to keep people in Dubbo and make them feel welcome, and they actually want to stay here, and rather than just come for 2 years for their visa or whatever and then go to a big city. So it's anything like that where we can actually engage put all the different communities in together so that they feel welcome and want to actually stay here. And given that regional New South Wales is responsible for most of the exports through primary industry and mining, we really do need workers in this area, and we're obviously not training enough people that live locally, so we do need to import the skills, but we also need them to stay. And part of that, as we've mentioned already, is basically community groups and places of worship and those sort of things where people want to actually put down roots in a community and stay here. So anything we can do at every level of government to ensure that that happens will benefit the whole country's productivity, really. Thanks.
Could I add in from a metropolitan growth areas perspective, we have the reverse problem. So your prospect example, Chair, of renewing an established area, we have new suburbs built with no facilities. Exactly. And so we did some research with the Australian Urban Observatory out of RMIT that showed growth areas have, for example, 68% less access to sports and leisure facilities than the rest of metropolitan areas, and 44% lower access to arts and cultural facilities. So we're coming from the other perspective, which is people have arrived, people have chosen to move to a new house, and it's vast and it happens very quickly, and it takes a very long time for social and community infrastructure to catch up. And that's where that
actually depends on the planning that we do as well, that governments do, whether it be local, state and federal governments, and when you are, have a greenfield and you're filling it, the forward thinking about centre, shops, etc., and how it's planned instead of just throwing in housing for miles and miles.
And a lot of that comes from state planning procedures, and then local government tries to catch up and spends a lot of time and money advocating for a pool or a sports field or a library or a gallery or just even a community centre. So, we know from research we did with Swinburne University that the most important thing for social connection is a place to gather. And that has to be local, it has to be walkable, it has to be accessible to everyone in that neighbourhood. And unfortunately, what happens in new developments is quite often the only place to gather will be the shopping centre or the pub that has gaming machines or those sorts of things, and that's not ideal.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things that regional capitals, and I'm pretty sure that the National Growth Areas Alliance is also in agreement on, and that is that grant-based funding has its place, but also a guaranteed source of funding for things like pools and art centres and sort of upgrades to streetscaping and all those sorts of things that make places really livable is really important. We know that the inner metropolitan areas have been established for some time. They are in a process of obviously, just topping up what they have. But as our cities continue to grow, there should be an ability to really fund growth in this country, and local government should be in the place to be able to continue to invest in those facilities when they don't currently have the rate base that can support that today, but they will have, the ability to retain those rates in the future to service that sort of infrastructure. So that's certainly something we've been putting to the government as well.
Thank you. I'll now ask Mr. Caldwell if he's got a question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And coming from a local government background, this really is a very interesting discussion for me. My question initially is to Bronwyn and then Mayor Black. I might just come back to you for a few thoughts on reverberating effects of some of this stuff. But Bronwyn, you said that your council groups are taking in about 200,000 of the new residents each year.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is that sort of in 2022-23, the net overseas migration was forecast to be about 235,000 and ended up being 538. The year after, it was forecast to be 235, got to 429. And so literally your council areas that are involved in your group are taking in almost all of the forecast for the whole country, shall we say. Now, has it got to a point where your members are just saying, literally, enough is enough? This infrastructure deficit is now so great, we need to start slowing this down?
Two parts to that question. The first is that the internal migration data showed between the last census and 2016 and 2021 census that, and it will be different again when census is collected this year, that the population growth in our local government areas, only 5% of that came from overseas migration. 37% came from elsewhere in Australia, and 53% of people had lived at the same address. So there is a lot of movement across growth areas and from people moving further out to a new area. Second thing,
what's the percentage of people moving out?
Moving out of the area? I don't have that, sorry. Okay. The second part of that question is none of our members see their role as saying we do or we don't want people to move here. The role of local government is to welcome anybody who chooses to move into that municipality and to support them as best we can through a range of services and infrastructure and programs. So our growth area councils, some are just starting on their journey of population growth, some have been growing for decades. It's business as usual to welcome new populations every year. And we exist as an alliance because even though this level of growth has been happening for a very long time, the sequencing of infrastructure investment or service delivery, that could be mental health services as well as schools and hospitals and things like that, it still hasn't caught up. And now with the housing crisis and the housing accord, we're seeing growth, on steroids really. And there is no compensation made for that rapid pace of growth and the infrastructure and services that people will need when they arrive there.
Thank you.
And so to Mayor Black, I mean, it's just extraordinary to me, isn't it, that some of these areas can attract hundreds of thousands of people, and yet your population is relatively stable, and you're really seeking out some skilled migration to make sure that the town can function effectively with health services, childcare services, and just putting the water and sewer through.
Yeah, you've got it right there. So Dubbo, I'll give you a Dubbo example. We grow at about 1.5% per year, the population of Dubbo, and it's been pretty much that way for decades now. And it doesn't seem to matter what happens, we grow at about that rate. But we've got a new subdivision where there's 5,500 blocks. That probably handled 15,000 people over the next 20 years. But the most that council can charge per block for enabling infrastructure is $30,000, and it's going to cost $50,000 to $60,000 per block to put that on. So ratepayers will be making up the difference there. That's something that, well, it's a state government setting there, and it really does need to change, but it can be helped by money from the federal government, obviously. We've got the land. Another issue for the Dubbo region, but it's going to be increasingly so, other members of ours, such as Armidale, is that with the renewable energy rollout, being in these renewable energy zones, there's a massive influx of a huge surge of workers and providing housing for that. And it really does tilt the balance of the local rental market. And that's also a problem. So we obviously can't say, no, you can't come and live in Dubbo or any other regional capital city, but we've got to do what we can to accommodate people when they're here, and we need skilled migrants, as you correctly said, to basically provide the essential services that we need, because you can also look at where training's been over the last 20 years or so. We've also had a bit of a drain from kids go off to uni in the city and they don't return to these regional areas, so that's been an issue for a long time, and we're filling that void with skilled migrants now.
Excellent. Thank you. I might go to Mr.
Sorry. And so, sorry, Chair, just one follow-up to that.
No, Mr. Caldwell.
To Mayor Black, what do you see as being the reason why we're not getting Australians doing some of these work, this work that's being required to be serviced by migrants? What do you think is stopping sort of Australians wanting these jobs or able to be skilled up to do them?
I think there's a whole range of reasons that the drain to the cities, like the capital cities, as I mentioned, and like we're an inland regional city here at Dubbo, and the coast is fairly attractive. So a lot of people are prepared to move over to Newcastle. There's always been a big drain of people from Dubbo to Newcastle, and that'd be the same all around the country. I'd suspect that the coast is quite an attractive place to live in. But there's been a lot of growth in NDIS workforce. You can go unskilled and earn a pretty good wage working in NDIS rather than having to go and actually get trained in some of these other areas. And some of these jobs like childcare, pretty tough jobs really, like working with kids. I was a teacher for over 20 years and it's a tough gig. So there's probably easier ways to earn a living than going into some sort of educational childcare or working in aged care. That's got its pluses and minuses. There's a whole range of reasons really, but the training options available in regional cities such as Dubbo are much reduced compared to in capital cities. So you need to travel, if you want to be a plumber in Dubbo, you need to travel to TAFE in Orange, best part of 2 hours away. So you've got sort of kids on their P-plates going back and forward to Orange to get their TAFE training to be a tradie. That's a problem as well.
Thank you.
Wow, that's actually extraordinary. Is it the similar sort of experience for things like childcare training as well, or?
Oh, you can do that at TAFE here in Dubbo now.
So there is a TAFE in Dubbo that offers some of those courses?
Yeah, but a lot of the trade ones, they do construction in Dubbo, but there's a lot that you have to actually travel for all over the countryside.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Reblo next.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks everyone for appearing before us. I'm just quite interested in the sequencing. So it's clear that there's an argument from everyone saying that we need more infrastructure in the regions. And part of that infrastructure is also to assist with people who are migrating there as well. And you know, you've spoken to the value of those skilled migrants. The sequencing in terms of the infrastructure and the migration, do you have a sense of what you think as to whether we need to have the infrastructure first and then the skilled migrants, or the skilled migrants in order to put the infrastructure in? And then as part of that, do you think that we're at a point now, because your evidence seems to suggest that we are behind in infrastructure, do you think we need time to catch up before we're sort of continuing to get the large amounts of migration that we're seeing into the country?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Mr. Robella, for that question. For metropolitan growth areas, a lot of the skill migration has had has an uplift really in our rates of educational attainment, of household income. It's meant that the housing offer has diversified to meet cultural communities and to respond to different cultural communities and the way they live. And it's actually added a lot of vibrancy to our communities. Because a lot of local jobs in growth areas are population serving, that means that a lot of the, not just residential construction, but other major infrastructure projects happening in every capital at the moment, as well as healthcare, education, some of the more managerial roles, professional roles in logistics and warehousing, that's where skill migration has a really positive role to play in employment in growth areas. In terms of build it first and they will come, yes please. And that's where we see this, it's almost like a cognitive dissonance that levels of government know where land is zoned for development. They know where people traditionally settle. The data shows where different people will settle when they arrive in Australia, or where population moves to. And yet that doesn't seem to be connected to the infrastructure pipeline. So I know Infrastructure Australia spoke earlier today, and we're really pleased to see a couple of projects on there that give a degree of certainty to outer suburban communities that the train line will come. However, quite often the marketing material for the residential development, which has been attractive to skilled people of all nationalities, said the train line will be here in 5 years, and it's actually going to take 30 years to build. So there's that real disconnect between reality on the ground of what is happening and where planning at different levels of government falls over.
Thank you. It's such a, I suppose the question is that we're such a vast country in terms of distances, network of roads, isolation in many towns. So I suppose it's always been difficult to maintain populations in country areas. And it's only human and natural to want to gravitate somewhere where the advantages are far higher, and the cities will always have those higher advantages. But I suppose in this particular inquiry, what we're looking at is skills shortages, skilled migration, how do we fill the gaps, and what can we do better to be able to entice people to those areas that have shortfalls. And if I was to ask a very simple question, across your councils that you represent, what would be the number one highest skill that's required that could solve an immediate problem? If you had all the infrastructure and everything else in place, what's the number one skill that you identify as needed the most across these council regional areas? Or no?
I'd say planners, town planners, statutory planners, within local government. We have so much growth happening and not enough planners to push it through, I'd suggest...
Okay, I worked in local government and I ran the planning section about 10, 15 years ago, and there was a glut of planners.
I actually worked for the Minister for Planning 15 years ago, and it was the same issue.
Well, they must have all moved on to private sector. Or
State government.
State government, private sector, yes. So that would be one, absolutely. And then some of the other things we've heard anecdotally just around from a local government perspective are engineers as well. So even any of those water-related projects that we desperately need, to find the engineer to oversee it is incredibly difficult.
Follow-on question specifically on engineers. We heard earlier that we have many engineers that come from different parts of the world that are highly skilled but are not recognised and cannot work in that area. Are you finding that in areas where you can't employ them because even though they're engineers with skills from overseas?
Probably can't speak to that directly. I'm sorry, but I do know that if we look at that recognition of skills is a really important thing, because quite often the sponsored skilled migrant will come with a family, and quite often we've done some research in the northern suburbs of Melbourne with the city of Whittlesea around a highly skilled and qualified wife who comes with a husband on a skilled migrant who cannot pursue her professional career locally because those professional jobs don't exist locally. And she is caught in what we call a spatial leash, so with childcare duties, school drop-off, childcare drop-off, getting transport into a major employment centre to pursue her career, logistically cannot be done. So the vast majority of women who come as a family with a skilled migrant will be locally employed and underemployed. So we're really not maximising their capacity, and we're pushing women, predominantly women, not all women as stay-at-home carers. We're pushing them into some sort of financial dependence on the husband as well.
Thank you. I'll ask if there's any other questions.
Can I just add from a regional perspective, health would be there, and then construction.
Health and infrastructure. Yeah.
Construction, yeah.
Thank you. Being no further questions, I think that brings us to an end. Thank you for appearing today before the committee. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, please send it to the Secretariat by Friday the 17th of April 2026. You'll be sent a transcript of today's evidence, and you also have the opportunity to change that transcript if you feel there's been errors made in it. So thank you very much. That concludes our hearing program today. Can I just thank all the witnesses for appearing before us today. Thank you for your valuable submissions and discussions. Can I thank the Secretariat for organising today and for their hard work? And of course, can I thank my colleagues for participating both online and in person? And of course to Hansard and Broadcasting for ensuring that there is an accurate record today. We thank them as well. So I declare this public meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you.